3 centuries ago, the will of heaven manifested. Numerous secret realms and dungeons descended upon earth. With them came powerful demons who declared humanity's end. Amidst the ensuing chaos, the awakened emerged. The job changers wielded formidable abilities, enabling them to vanquish these creatures and prevent the collapse of civilization. To combat these threats, job changers delved into the secret kingdoms in pursuit of riches and resources. Nations prioritized cultivating job changers, enabling all individuals to awaken at 18. The awaited day arrived for students to awaken their class. To do so, they had to touch a mystical blue crystal. One by one, students stepped forward. Wang W., from Class 2 of the 3rd year, failed to awaken, earning the title of classless. Meanwhile, Li W. from Class 3 awakened as a swordsman, and Wang Hao from Class 3 of the 2nd year attained the crafter class. Awakened classes fell into 3 primary categories: combat, support, and creation. The combat category was the most sought after, while the creation category was deemed the weakest, often shunned by society. More students took their turn, and a boy with purple hair rejoiced upon awakening as a magic swordsman. Conversely, another student wept, having gained a creation-based class, lamenting his fate. Upon the conclusion of the awakening ceremony, classes were further ranked into common, secret, and divine. Among these, the divine rank was the rarest, appearing once every century. At last, it was time for our protagonist, Jiang Chen, to approach the crystal. As he touched it, the crystal radiated an intense light, causing the students to gasp in awe. A brown-haired student pointed, calling him the Academy's prodigy. As Jiang Chen continued, the light intensified, ascending toward the sky. Speculations ran wild, many believing he had awakened a divine rank class, an event unseen in Zhang City for generations. Moments later, the crystal's light took the shape of a colossal tree visible throughout the city. It was said that every divine awakening caused a phenomenon capable of shaking heaven and earth. Once the awakening was complete, Jiang Chen remained still, one hand in his pocket, staring skyward. Director Wang arrived, praising him as the Academy's pride. Though he anticipated Jiang Chen to awaken a combat class, he never expected a divine one. Curious, Director Wang inquired about his class. Jiang Chen smiled and responded that his class was not of the combat category. A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Director Wang's expression changed as he asked if he had awakened a support class instead. Jiang Chen extended his hands outward, revealing ethereal plants sprouting from his palms. He declared that he had awakened the divine rank. Creation class, Spiritual Master. This class specialized in nurturing flora and small creatures. Shocked murmurs spread through the crowd. Director Wang frowned, acknowledging that even at divine rank, creation classes lacked combat prowess, rendering them ineffective in battle. A professor tried to console Jiang Chen, stating that spiritual masters were valued in research fields. However, he regretfully revoked the promised recommendation. Before the professor could continue, Jiang Chen cut him off. Smiling, he thanked him before walking away, hands tucked in his pockets. Laughter erupted among the students. One sneered, remarking that Jiang Chen, the Academy star, had ended up with a useless class. Another mockingly noted that Lin, the school's beauty, had awakened a powerful secret combat class. Jiang Chen, unbothered, simply smirked, acknowledging how quickly opinions had shifted. He realized that in this world, strength dictated respect. Curious about his newfound abilities, he extended his hand, triggering a system window. A notification revealed that he had successfully awakened the divine rank class, Spiritual Master, unlocking the natural calamity insect system. This system granted him access to the mother of insects. Jiang Chen gazed at the window, a grin forming. He was certain this class suited him perfectly. His name was Jiang Chen. In his past life, he had perished, only to be reborn in this awakened world. After the Dark Era ended, the world became riddled with dungeons and monsters. Only the strong held any real power. Born an orphan, Jiang Chen had struggled to survive. With nothing to his name, he worked relentlessly. Before his 18th birthday, he believed he would have to carve his own path. Little did he know, his true journey was just beginning. Back to the present, Jiang Chen hears the system announce the merging of the insect calamity system. After class, the awakening and system activation would occur after a successful transfer. Jiang Chen placed his hand on his chin, looking at the system window, and thought about the race that had once devastated humanity during the Dark Era, an incredibly powerful race. He had heard that the last time a natural calamity occurred, 9 out of the 12 kings of the human race had been sacrificed to seal it. He clenched his fist, knowing that in this world, strength was everything. There was no room for doubt. He focused on the system window, his body radiating powerful energy, thinking that if he could harness the strength of the insect race, the insects would have no chance against him. Without overthinking, Jiang Chen activated the system, and he was teleported inside. He looked around, somewhat confused, before noticing a great spiritual tree in front of him. He placed a hand near his head to cover his eyes, and a thought crossed his mind: was this his talent? He hadn't expected it to take the form of a tree. More system windows appeared, revealing Jiang Chen's class talents, which involved the evolution of all things, with sacrifice required. These talents could be used once every 10 days and were limited to one use per target. The first talent was called Fruits of All Things. By sacrificing, Jiang Chen could advance the growth of fruits, and a special fruit could randomly fall. The second talent, Improved Growth, allowed him to increase the growth rate of living beings, with the current increase at 10%. This ability could accelerate the growth of any living creature, and its cooldown lasted 8 hours. As Jiang Chen pondered these talents, he noted that, while they seemed lacking in combat power, they could still be applied to his system. While distracted, another system window appeared, asking if he wanted to summon the mother insect. Without hesitation, Jiang Chen commanded the system to summon her. A dark, evil energy began to rise from the ground, and a notification confirmed the summoning of the mother insect. Jiang Chen observed the energy, sensing the mother's strong presence. Moments later, the system confirmed that the summoning of the natural calamity rank mother insect, named 9 Wings of Miasma, had been completed. The mother of the insects was a colossal creature that began to stare at Jiang Chen. He took several steps back in awe. The mother insect's status appeared, revealing her name as 9 Miasma Wing from the Abyss, known as the Sovereign of Death. Once a calamity, she had caused devastation as great as a natural disaster before disappearing during the Third Era. Her current devouring value was at 0%. Jiang Chen had 100% affinity with the insect mother. To unlock her abilities, he had to proceed with devouring and start breeding the next generation of insects. The insect mother approached him, and Jiang Chen couldn't help but wonder why she was so enormous. The insect mother, addressing him as master, introduced herself as Little Nine, explaining that she was very hungry and wanted to devour fierce beasts. Another system window appeared, informing him that the insect mother's growth rate had increased by 10%. Jiang Chen realized that with his talent, he didn't need to use sacrificial objects to enhance her. Without wasting time, he commanded the system to upgrade the insect mother. The insect mother's body was enveloped in a powerful green light. Jiang Chen observed her, understanding that she needed to devour in order to level up. This would not be easy. The insect mother emitted a potent aura as her body started evolving, gradually taking on the form of a human woman. A few seconds later, she had successfully evolved. Her body exuded a powerful aura. She had white hair and wore armor that radiated a murderous intent. As she stared at Jiang Chen, she advanced toward him. A system window appeared, announcing that she had leveled up and gained new abilities. The first ability was called Nurture, allowing her to share experience 10 times with the host. The second ability was Poisonous Mist, which allowed her to transform into deadly miasma that corroded everything in her path. The third ability, Communion, enhanced all of the host's abilities by 20%. Jiang Chen was taken aback by her new form, but Little Nine gained momentum and pounced on him, giving him a hug. She explained that she had evolved. Confused, Jiang Chen turned slightly to her, blushing when he saw that the insect mother had assumed a human form. She stopped hugging him, and Jiang Chen began stroking her head. She closed her eyes, clenched both fists, and referred to him as master. Smiling, she explained that Little Nine wanted to devour flesh and blood. While Jiang Chen stroked her head, a status window appeared above her. Her name was 9 Miasma, and she had 4 abilities: Poison Mist, Feed Fury, and United. Her devouring value was still at 0%. Once this value was filled, she could start spawning offspring. 2 passive abilities were also revealed: Experience Return and Attribute Enhancement. Jiang Chen thought that his spiritual master talent could accelerate the devouring growth of the insect mother, which would, in turn, speed up his own improvement. Furthermore, the insect mother could enhance all of his attributes by 20%. His class was a perfect match for this. He didn't need a combat class. Extending his hands to his sides, a swarm of insects began to emerge from his palms. Amazed, Jiang Chen realized that as long as he killed and devoured quickly, he could soon have an entire army of insects. Looking toward the great spiritual tree, Jiang Chen recalled what the system message had said about the insect's abyss being as catastrophic as a natural calamity. With this incomplete information, he realized that what he was dealing with could not easily be shown to others. If discovered, it could lead to his demise. Putting his hands in his pockets, he looked back at the spiritual tree, deciding to use his class identity as creation and the poisonous miasma abilities of the insect mother to devour monsters and increase his strength. Hiding was not Jiang Chen's style. He aimed to become strong enough to show off his skills to the world. As he was lost in thought, the sea of consciousness water began to move. Sensing this, the insect mother quickly jumped up and started flying. They both looked at the water, and Jiang Chen explained that this could only mean one thing. With a murderous look in her eyes, the insect mother turned and caught Jiang Chen's attention. Smiling, she explained that she sensed a threat. At that moment, Jiang Chen exited the system space and was shocked to see a man much taller than him standing in front of him. The man had black hair, a beard, and a scar over one eye. The man approached and stared into Jiang Chen's eyes, remaining silent for several moments. Finally, the man asked if the awakening phenomenon, which the entire city had witnessed, had been activated by Jiang Chen. Jiang Chen clenched his teeth, realizing that this man was at least a master rank or higher. He became alert, wondering why he was being sought after. The man stared intently at Jiang. His body began to emit a powerful green aura. The people around him were drawn in, sensing his strength, even from a distance. They could feel the intensity of his presence and began to wonder just what level of awakened he might be. When they saw him speaking with Jiang Chen, their curiosity grew. Was there a conflict brewing between the two? As the man continued to lock eyes with Jiang, the pressure became palpable. Jiang started to feel uneasy. It was strange, this man had been silently pressuring him for a while, and he couldn't quite understand if this was some kind of test. Suddenly, the insect mother appeared, licking her finger as she approached Jiang with a murderous gleam in her eyes. She told Jiang that this man was a threat to him and, to her, he seemed delicious. She wanted to devour him. Jiang's instincts kicked in, and he realized something was off. His fears were confirmed when several warning windows from the system popped up. The insect mother had detected a threat, and the system flagged this man as high value for devouring. Just as the insect mother prepared to attack, Jiang's body released an even stronger aura, a defensive response. The powerful energy spread in all directions, and the students who had previously mocked him were now stunned, covering their faces, sensing the cold, sinister aura emanating from him. Jiang was furious. With a cold, murderous look, he stared into the man's eyes, realizing that the insect mother's aggression increased when her devouring value was low. He knew he needed to find monsters for Little Nine to devour as soon as possible to prevent a full-on conflict. Despite Jiang's overwhelming aura, the man simply smiled. Zhang quickly deduced that the man was trying to test his strength but had unintentionally activated the insect mother. Fortunately, Zhang had enough control to suppress her, though it was only temporary. A system window appeared, confirming that the insect mother had been suppressed and that her devouring value was now low. To prevent this from happening again, Zhang knew he would need to start devouring and breeding the insect mother as soon as possible. The man, hands still in his jacket pockets, observed Zhang with admiration. He complimented Zhang, saying that despite his recent awakening, he was already capable of facing challenges and countering them. He added that Zhang was worthy of a divine awakening and that his future was limitless. Zhang, still silent, felt a sense of relief he had not been discovered. He then approached the man, locking eyes with him, and asked who he was. The man smiled and introduced himself as Jai Gang, the leader of the Night Watch. He praised Zhang's strength and extended an invitation to join them. This caught Zhang off guard. The Night Watch? He hadn't expected such an offer. Jai Gang explained that the Night Watch was an elite organization tasked by Grzia with fighting demons and beast hordes. They were always the first to respond to new threats, whether they be waves of beasts or newly discovered realms. The mortality rate for the Night Watch was extraordinarily high due to the dangers they faced, and most people stayed away. But for Zhang, this organization seemed like the perfect fit. The insect mother needed a constant source of monsters to devour to grow her strength and breed. Zhang needed opportunities to confront large monsters, and once the devouring value was met, the insect mother would begin reproducing. The wild nature, filled with dangerous creatures, would be an ideal place for breeding. Joining the Night Watch would allow Zhang to deal with these threats efficiently. The students around them murmured that the Night Watch had a notorious reputation, and most avoided it due to the high mortality rate. They were sure that Zhang wouldn't join. However, Jai Gang assured him that those rumors were from the past. To entice him further, he promised comprehensive training and resources befitting someone with Zhang's divine rank. Without hesitation, Zhang shook Jai Gang's hand and agreed to join, telling him that there was no need for further explanation. As he stared into Jai Gang's eyes, he remarked that the Night Watch's generation should not shy away from their duty if they hoped to restore the organization's former glory. Zhang then explained that he was willing to join for this very reason. Jai Gang, though surprised, was now more intrigued. He hadn't expected the situation to resolve so smoothly. What he didn't know was that Zhang planned to use the Night Watch to help with the insect breeding. Just as Jai Gang was about to ask more questions, the insect mother appeared again, furious. She sent another system notification to Zhang, expressing her dissatisfaction with Zhang's decision. She still wanted to eat the man. Zhang quickly became nervous and closed his eyes. He had no choice but to admit that she was right. He excused himself, claiming he had an important task to do. As he distanced himself from Jai Gang, he turned his head and waved goodbye, telling him he would be at the Night Watch headquarters in 3 days. Jai Gang remained silent, perhaps puzzled by the simplicity of the interaction. He had forgotten to ask Zhang what hidden profession he had. Just then, 2 men descended from the sky, landing near Jai Gang. One of them was the 8th elder of the Martial Arts Academy. Jai Gang turned toward them and quipped that if they were there to recruit from the Night Watch, they were too late. The elder, however, was focused on something else. He asked where the person was who had awakened a divine rank creation class. Jai Gang, now confused, turned to the elder, asking what he meant. The elder, with a surprised look, responded, wondering if Jai Gang was truly planning to let a divine ranked creation class awaken join the Night Watch, only to face certain death. It was then that Jai Gang realized the true nature of Zhang's awakening. Meanwhile, in the city, a man named Uncle Wang approached Zhang, asking if he was the one responsible for the phenomenon in the main city. Zhang nodded. At the same time, a woman with purple hair approached Uncle Wang, warning him to lower his voice, or risk facing dire consequences. Uncle Wang leaned back, placing his hands behind his head, closed his eyes, and started laughing. He told Zhang that he always talked non-stop. Zhang approached with a smile, closed his eyes, and reassured Uncle Wang not to worry, saying this wasn't anything embarrassing. Uncle Wang turned toward Zhang and said that while the creation category couldn't fight, he'd heard that companies often cultivated spiritual plants requiring people from the creation category. If Jiang's parents were here, they would be proud of him. Over the years, Jiang had survived thanks to the support of everyone in his building. Smiling, he assured them he wouldn't forget them in the future. Uncle Wang waved off his words, saying there was no need to worry about such small things. Then, he added that Jiang had arrived at the perfect time. They were about to enter a beginner-level secret realm to gather equipment. Uncle Wang invited Jiang to join them and level up together. Jiang accepted, thanking Uncle Wang. At that moment, a system message appeared, confirming the team formation. A few minutes later, Jiang and the group stepped through the portal, entering the secret realm. With his hands in his jacket pockets, Jiang looked around, wondering if this was really the interior of a secret realm. Suddenly, the torches lining the walls flared to life, signaling that the matchmaking process was complete. The monsters within the realm turned their attention toward the group. This secret realm, known as the Temple of the Dead, was classified as C rank and currently open. It boasted a 100% drop rate for items and equipment, with experience points calculated upon completion. Leaving midway meant forfeiting both rewards. Uncle Wang tensed upon realizing the monsters were undead soldiers. He questioned why the system had assigned them to such a high-level dungeon. Jiang studied the undead soldiers, quickly understanding that this realm would not be easy. A girl with purple hair stepped forward and explained that because Jiang was a divine-ranked awakened, the celestial system had assigned them a more difficult realm. Uncle Wang turned to her and reminded her that Jiang had awakened in the creation category. Another girl, with brown hair, approached and asked if they should abandon the realm. Before she could finish, Uncle Wang unsheathed his sword and cut her off. He declared that such opportunities were rare, and with Jiang here, their chances of getting good drops had improved. Seeing Uncle Wang draw his sword, the undead soldiers became enraged. Uncle Wang charged forward, instructing Jiang to stay back since these monsters were more dangerous than typical C-rank creatures. As they advanced toward the dungeon's core, Uncle Wang struck an undead soldier with a powerful blow to its head. He called out to Zai, urging her to enhance his talent. Without hesitation, Zai clasped her hands together, activating her power, and Uncle Wang felt himself grow stronger. With this boost, he swiftly dispatched the undead soldier. As the battle raged on, Jiang stood at a distance, watching. He wondered if these people fought monsters daily just to survive. Seeing them covered in wounds made him realize the hardship they endured. His gaze fell on Zai, who had always supported him. He recalled hearing that she became an adventurer to heal her brother's eyes. Determined, Jiang resolved to grow stronger and properly repay them once he earned enough money. While Jiang was lost in thought, the insect mother manifested beside him. Resting her chin on her hand, she gazed at the fallen undead soldier and expressed her hunger, wanting to devour the corpses. Jiang smirked, knowing that Little Nine had already detected the bodies. Deciding to test her abilities, he stretched out his hand and activated the level 1 poison barrier skill, Corrosion. A poisonous mist formed in his palm, and he ordered Little Nine to feed on the corpse. She thanked him as the toxic fog spread, enveloping the fallen monsters. Within moments, the corpses disintegrated. Jiang observed how the bodies corroded upon contact with the mist, confirming its potency. After devouring the corpse, Little Nine's devouring value increased to 10 points. However, since these monsters were weak, her growth rate was slow. She needed to consume more. With one hand in his pocket, Jiang turned back toward Uncle Wang and the others. They had already advanced deep into the dungeon, proving their strong teamwork. Since the poisonous mist was an area of effect skill and Jiang still couldn't control it precisely, he chose to follow from behind, taking care of the corpses. Suddenly, Little Nine called out to him. She sensed something. Jiang turned to the side, noticing more monsters emerging from the ground. Little Nine whispered that she smelled fresh blood in that direction. These creatures were level 10 shadow lurkers, stealthy hunters that preyed on weaker adventurers. Each had 20 strength, 15 agility, 10 defense, and 5 stamina. Jiang stared at them, wondering why their names appeared in red. Was it because their level was higher than his? However, their stats were inferior to his, thanks to his skill enhancements. A status window appeared before Jiang. Devouring value, level 1. Identity, Lord of Insects. Occupation, divine rank spiritual master. Talents, growth of all things, divine evolution, ancestral tree of all things. Insect mother, little 9, miasma wing, natural calamity level. Equipment, none. Stats, strength 35, agility 31, endurance 27, constitution 20. Combat power, 41 stars. Abilities, experience return, passive, attribute enhancement, passive. Devouring value, 100. Experience, 0. Zhang decided to test his skills further. He stretched out his hand and commanded Little 9 to transform into a poisonous mist and follow him. She obeyed, dispersing into the air, sticking to the ground at that moment. The creatures known as shadow lurkers surged forward, closing in with terrifying speed. Without hesitation, he brought his hand close to his face, releasing a faint green mist, Little 9's poisonous essence. His eyes remained sharp and unwavering as he stared at the advancing monsters. In a flash, he sprinted toward them, his movements swift and calculated. The creatures lunged, claws slashing through the air, but he was faster. Dodging their attacks with ease, he weaved through their ranks, making brief contact with their bodies. Instantly, the poisonous mist seeped into their flesh. The shadow lurkers hesitated, their gazes fixed on the eerie substance spreading across their skin. Confusion turned to panic as they realized something was terribly wrong. Watching them intently, he slowly extended his hand before clenching his fist tightly. A sinister smile crossed his lips as the mist thickened, corroding the monsters from within. Their agonized screeches echoed through the dungeon as their bodies slowly crumbled into dust. Little 9's poison worked relentlessly, consuming them from the inside out. Without a word, he turned away, his expression unreadable, as the creatures fell one by one. Suddenly, glowing system windows appeared before him, displaying his latest rewards, 200 special points gained. Glancing at the remains of his foes, he smirked as he noticed his devouring value rising rapidly. These creatures had been no match for him. His strength was growing, but this was only the beginning. Before he could fully process his victory, Little 9's voice echoed in his mind, warning him that more blood food had appeared behind them. Turning his gaze, his expression darkened as even more shadow lurkers emerged from the darkness, their menacing presence even more overwhelming than before. Yet, he remained still, hands in his pockets, unmoved by the looming threat. A flicker of concern crossed his mind. Were the others safe? With so many creatures lurking in the dungeon, he needed to finish this quickly. Without wasting any more time, he turned to Little 9 and asked if she could handle them. Slowly, she emerged from the poison itself, her mist swirling like a living entity. Reaching out a hand toward the trembling creatures, a sinister grin spread across her face as she assured him that these monsters were nothing but small prey. The thick mist spread further, engulfing the battlefield as another massacre began.
Several minutes later, Zhang arrived where Uncle Wang and the others were. Upon his arrival, he saw Uncle Wang gravely injured. They were surrounded by monsters. Uncle Wang gripped his sword tightly with both hands, his back pressed against Zi's. She extended both hands outward, preparing to use her ability to defend against the oncoming attack. The monsters, undeterred, advanced toward them rapidly. Uncle Wang, blood dripping onto his face from his wound, clenched his teeth and spoke to Zi. He explained that with each wave, the monsters were becoming increasingly difficult to defeat. At this rate, survival seemed impossible. Turning his head toward Zi, he ordered her to find Zhang and leave immediately. Zi, shocked by his command, turned to him and asked what he meant. Before he could answer, an undead soldier lunged forward, seizing the moment of distraction. Its blade aimed straight for Uncle Wang. Holding his sword in one hand, Uncle Wang sensed the attack and quickly turned his head. The enemy's sword was mere inches away. He clenched his teeth. Not good, he thought. Just then, Zhang appeared. Reaching out, he unleashed Little N's poisonous mist ability. The undead soldier's blade stopped just before striking Uncle Wang as the mist clung to its body. Slowly, it corroded the monster, dissolving it into nothing. Uncle Wang turned, shocked and confused. Zhang's voice rang out. Are you all okay? Upon hearing him, Uncle Wong turned his head. He saw Zhang standing there and clenched his teeth, speechless. Zhang advanced slowly, extending his hand. Once more, he released Little N's poisonous mist, eroding the undead soldiers. Uncle Wong watched in awe as the monsters disintegrated. Turning to Zhang, he asked, "How is a creation class awakened like you capable of this?" Zhang stopped in front of Uncle Wong, his body radiating powerful energy. He smiled and explained, "I have a hidden ability, poisonous mist." To demonstrate, he extended his hand again, releasing another wave of mist. Noticing Uncle Wong's injury, Zhang turned to Z and Zili. "Take him to the portal of the secret realm," he instructed. "I'll stay behind to cover you." Silence fell. Everyone looked at him, stunned. Uncle Wong finally spoke. "Even if you possess a divine class, this is too dangerous." Z hesitated, then pleaded, "Come with us. You shouldn't face them alone." Zili remained silent, watching. Zhang turned his back on them. Energy surged from his body. Slightly tilting his head, he reassured them, "Don't worry. I'll be fine." Then, he stepped forward toward the approaching monsters. At that moment, the system announcement echoed, "Due to the number of participants meeting the final level's requirements, the secret realm's boss is being summoned." Uncle Wong watched as Zhang walked away. He wanted to stop him, but before he could speak, Z intervened. She reminded him, "Zhang isn't reckless. Trust him." After a long pause, Uncle Wong sighed and nodded. He tossed Zhang his sword. "Don't forget to return it later." Zhang caught it mid-air. Smirking, he replied, "I promise." This was the Novice Conqueror's sword, a weapon with 25 speed, 30 strength, a 2% attack speed bonus, and an active passive ability. Zhang examined it briefly, then turned to the monsters. Holding the sword firmly, he activated poisonous mist. The mist spread along the blade's edge. The undead soldiers lunged, but Zhang effortlessly dodged, slicing through them. The mist-infused blade cut through them like butter, infecting them as they fell apart. Zhang's swordsmanship was unparalleled, he was the best in the school. Yet, as he battled, an even stronger monster emerged. Gaining momentum, it charged at high speed. Zhang, still mid-fight, didn't sense it at first. Turning his head at the last second, he saw it coming. The monster swung its sword. Zhang reacted instantly, leaping high into the air. The monster's strike shattered the ground below. Zhang landed, facing his opponent. Their eyes locked. Murderous intent filled the air. The monster gripped its sword tightly and attacked again. Zhang barely managed to block it using Uncle Wong's sword. But the sheer power of the strike caused the blade to snap in half. Zhang was flung backward. Twisting mid-air, he landed on his feet, steadying himself. Looking at the broken sword, his eyes widened. "This boss is stronger than I expected," he murmured. A greater concern filled his mind, how would he explain the broken sword to Uncle Wong? The boss of the secret realm, the undead king, loomed before him. It was level 15. Holding its massive blade, the undead king fixated on Zhang. Suddenly, its body vibrated. In a blink, it disappeared. Zhang's eyes darted around. Where? A chilling presence surged behind him. His heart pounded. He spun around, too late. The undead king's sword was already descending. Terror flickered in Zhang's eyes. How is it this fast? Summoning all his strength, he called out. "Little Nine." Just as the sword was about to strike, Little Nine appeared. She caught the blade, her fierce eyes locking onto the undead king, and asked Zhang if she could eliminate him. Without hesitation, Zhang replied yes. Upon hearing this, Little Nine's expression brightened. Using only her hand, she shattered the blade of the undead king's sword into pieces. She extended her hands to the sides, her body radiating a powerful energy that surged outward in all directions. The undead king, now unarmed, immediately became alert. Realizing its sword was gone, it decided to fight using its fists. Taking advantage of Little Nine's momentary distraction, the undead king lunged forward, aiming for a surprise attack. At that moment, Little Nine's eyes snapped open, her expression shifting dramatically. A murderous gleam flashed in her gaze as she locked onto the undead king. With lightning speed, she deployed her tentacles in defense, swiftly shifting into an offensive stance. Her tentacles, sharp as blades, lashed out with a barrage of strikes against the undead king. Piece by piece, she began dismantling its body. First, she severed its left arm, then its right, and finally, with a swift final strike, she decapitated it. The undead king's head was impaled on one of her tentacles, before she turned away. Its lifeless body collapsed to the ground as she gripped the severed head in her hand, her energy still crackling through the air. Zhang watched in awe. Seeing the sheer strength of Little Nine, he couldn't help but smile. He marveled at how effortlessly she had taken down a boss-level monster in the secret realm. As he processed what had just happened, he assumed that with the boss defeated, the portal would open. Little Nine leaped down and landed near Zhang. At that moment, an energy crystal materialized before them. Zhang's eyes narrowed as he observed the glowing crystal, wondering what it was. Slowly, the crystal began to rise into the sky, pulling in magical energy from the corpses of the fallen monsters. His astonishment deepened as he watched the transformation unfold. Seconds later, the energy crystal pulsed with an intense glow, and a massive figure emerged. A towering monster materialized before them, the undead tyrant. It was 20 times larger than both Zhang and Little Nine. Its eyes burned with a killer instinct as it locked onto them. Zhang quickly realized that the energy crystal was not just some relic, it was the true boss of the secret realm. His eyes darted to Little Nine before he clenched his teeth and issued a command. She needed to destroy the energy crystal within the undead tyrant. As the monster roared, it swung a massive mace at Little Nine. In the blink of an eye, she propelled herself off a nearby wall, narrowly dodging the crushing blow. The undead tyrant, unfazed, prepared for another attack. It swung again, but Little Nine leaped high into the air, evading the strike once more. The sheer force of the mace's impact shattered the ground beneath them. While midair, Little Nine's expression darkened. Her sharp tentacles shot forward, aiming directly at the undead tyrant. However, the monstrous entity moved with shocking agility, effortlessly dodging each strike. Zhang's eyes widened in disbelief. A creature of such immense size shouldn't be this fast. Clenching his fists, he quickly searched for a plan. His gaze swept across the battlefield until he spotted something, plants sprouting through the cracks in the debris. His mind raced. He only had one chance. Tapping into his divine creation class, known as Spiritual Master, he focused on the plants, preparing to use his unique abilities.
Zhang realized that the undead tyrant was incredibly fast, and each of its attacks carried immense power. As the creature lifted its massive mace from the ground, it gained momentum like an enraged bull spiraling out of control. But Zhang also saw this as a potential weakness. Little Nine attempted to strike with her sharp tentacles, but the undead tyrant spun its body at high speed, dodging effortlessly. Using this momentum, it advanced quickly toward Zhang. Within seconds, it made a powerful leap. Zhang looked up, locking eyes with the airborne foe, sensing the danger. He had already detected the presence of many hidden roots beneath the ground. As the undead tyrant soared, gripping its mace with both hands, it prepared for a devastating attack. Zhang knew he had to act. Watching the creature inch closer, he decided to use his talent at the perfect moment to stop it in its tracks. As the enemy neared, Zhang extended his hand toward the ground. A green symbol appeared, and the hidden spiritual roots began to emerge. He turned toward the undead tyrant, his intense gaze unwavering, and extended his hand. Within seconds, four spiritual roots erupted from the ground, piercing the tyrant's body and suspending it midair, rendering it completely immobilized. Zhang's body emitted a powerful aura as he turned to Little Nine and signaled that it was now her turn. In an instant, she reached the restrained tyrant. Placing one hand on its head and preparing her claws with the other, she met its gaze with a murderous intensity. "Understood, master," she responded. The undead tyrant's expression twisted in panic as it realized what was coming. It struggled to break free, but the roots held firm. Before it could react, Little Nine gained momentum and unleashed a flurry of attacks with her claws and tentacles, slicing the tyrant in half and shattering the spiritual roots in the process. The lifeless corpse of the undead tyrant crashed to the ground. Zhang, still extending his hand, controlled the fading spiritual roots as he gazed upon his fallen enemy with a sense of accomplishment. He had successfully defeated the undead tyrant. Zhang's abilities, though still developing, proved invaluable. As long as he used his skills effectively, he could play a significant role in battle. Lost in thought, he was suddenly interrupted by a system notification. His growth acceleration ability was now on cooldown for 8 hours. Slowly, the spiritual roots began to retreat into the earth. Moments later, a core emerged from the tyrant's remains. Zhang wasted no time. Before it could escape, he seized it with his hand and crushed it into fragments. As the shattered pieces fell to the ground, he clenched his fist, knowing the battle had truly ended. Just then, several system notifications appeared, congratulating Zhang on clearing the C-rank secret realm, the Temple of the Undead. The system calculated contributions, and within seconds, it generated the team's final rankings. Zhang Chen, Level 0, Spiritual Master, S rating. Wang Yi, Level 12, Swordsman, B rating. Lu Wing, Level 11, Warlock, A rating. Andon, Level 10, Boxer, B rating. The heavenly system began distributing team rewards, and a selection window appeared before Zhang. Several weapons were available. A dagger. A scepter. A heavy axe. A light axe. A hammer. As the spiritual roots fully receded, Zhang focused on the system window. He reached inside and retrieved the dagger. Its stats immediately displayed EDU's Swift Dagger, rank D, granting 50 attack points and a 5% speed bonus. It also provided 2 professional attributes related to sword combat. Zhang examined the blade and decided it would serve as compensation for Uncle Wang. His eyes drifted back to the system window, realizing that all the available equipment was combat-oriented. He wasn't sure if anything suited the creation classes. Curious, he reached in and pulled out the hammer. As soon as he did, it crashed to the ground under its immense weight. The hammer, Call of the King, provided 100 strength points but deducted 100 agility points due to its heft. It also had a 10% chance to trigger 5 times critical damage. Struggling at first, Zhang gradually adjusted, his newfound experience allowing him to lift it with ease. A system notification suddenly informed him that United Ability was now active, increasing all his attributes by 20%. As a surge of power surrounded him, he lifted the hammer effortlessly with one hand while slipping the other into his pocket. Under the Insect Mother's passive ability, he had reached level 6, making the United effect even stronger. He also realized that his physical combat abilities scaled with his level. While deep in thought, Little Nine tugged on his shirt, snapping him back to reality. She pointed at the system window and eagerly asked, "Can I eat all this as my reward?" Zhang set the hammer down and considered her request. "Little Nine, you can't eat the equipment. It's meant for Uncle Wang and the others to sell for money. Besides, if you eat it, you'll get a stomachache." Hearing this, she pouted, placing one hand behind her back while touching her lips with the other. Then, turning toward the undead tyrant's corpse, she asked, "Then can I devour that?" Zhang had completely forgotten about the remains. The devouring value was precious and couldn't be wasted. As his body pulsed with energy, he turned toward the fallen corpse, preparing to take action. Zhang Chen granted Little Nine permission to devour the corpse since it belonged to her. Without hesitation, she approached the massive body of the undead tyrant. As Zhang observed the corpse, he couldn't help but wonder if this boss was unusually large. Given its size, if Little Nine used her poisonous mist to corrode it, it might take quite some time. Little Nine spread her hands to the sides, closed her eyes, and opened her mouth, telling Zhang that she was digging in. At that moment, her body started vibrating, and within seconds, she returned to her natural form. Her gaze darkened with murderous intent as she stared at the corpse. Then, she opened her mouth and lunged toward it. Despite the tyrant's enormous size, compared to the mother insect's natural form, it was minuscule. Seeing her transformation and the way she devoured the corpse, Jiang was taken aback. With a powerful roar, she rapidly advanced toward the remains, creating a strong gust of wind in the process. Jiang took advantage of this moment, retrieving all the equipment from the system window. Holding his hammer in one hand, he covered his face with the other. The roar was deafening. Fortunately, they were in a secret realm. If this had happened in the main city, no matter how well they tried to hide, they would have been discovered. As soon as she finished devouring the corpse, a system notification appeared, granting Jiang 400 devouring points. While shielding his face, he noticed the devouring value was increasing rapidly. As expected, the value of a boss's meat was different. He realized they needed to hunt more boss-type monsters to accelerate their devouring progression. Just as he was deep in thought, he heard footsteps approaching. His head snapped back, and he clenched his teeth. Uncle Wang and the others were coming, likely drawn by the noise Little Nine had made. The devouring value had reached 8,876 points. Jiang quickly approached Little Nine, urging her to return to her disguised form. She simply smiled and responded, "Understood, Master." Jiang regretted the interruption. They were so close to filling the devouring value. Moments later, Uncle Wang and the others arrived. Seeing the equipment scattered on the floor, he immediately realized that Jiang had successfully passed the level. Jiang explained that his sword had broken during the battle, but in return, he handed Uncle Wang a rare dagger. Without hesitation, Uncle Wang accepted the weapon and assured Jiang that he wouldn't hold him accountable for the damaged sword. Zhao Zai approached Jiang, pointing out that the necklace he had obtained was also a rare item and could fetch a high price. Meanwhile, Ying was in disbelief how had Jiang managed to defeat the boss alone. Scratching the back of his head, Jiang explained that his poison seemed particularly effective against monsters like this one. His expression turned serious as he gazed downward. The secret realm had been completely cleared, but once cleared, it would not refresh again. If they wanted more devouring value, they would need to find another boss. The best option now was to head for the desert. Uncle Wang looked at Jiang with a sense of regret, remarking that it was a shame he was joining the research department instead of becoming a fighter. Despite not even being level 1, he had already taken down a boss monster. If he leveled up, he would become incredibly strong. Then, Uncle Wang asked about his next plans. With a smile, Jiang turned to him and confessed that he had kept something secret to avoid worrying them. He was preparing to join the night watch. Uncle Wang was stunned. "Are you serious about joining the night watch?" he asked. Jiang nodded and explained that he was leaving in 3 days. Before that, he wanted to increase his level, so he planned to head into the wilderness soon for further training. Everyone was shocked. Ying covered her mouth in disbelief, and Zai reached out her hand toward Jiang, her expression grave. She warned him that the wilderness was extremely dangerous. Before she could finish speaking, Jiang cut her off. Clenching his fist tightly, a faint poisonous mist emerged from his palm. He reassured her not to worry about him. He knew what he was doing. Instead, he urged them to focus their concern on the real danger, the monsters. That same day, a few hours later, Jiang boarded a train heading to the outskirts of the city. As they arrived, the conductor announced for those traveling into the wilderness to disembark. Jiang stepped off the train, wearing a cloak to avoid drawing attention. He paused for a moment, scanning his surroundings. In front of him stood a bridge, bustling with awakened individuals. Ever since awakening, his appetite had increased significantly. What was even more surprising was that, despite being unstable, his devouring value had slightly increased just from eating. Taking out a loaf of bread, he took a bite, noticing his devouring value rise by 2 points. Little Nine materialized beside him, covering her mouth in disgust as she eyed the bread. "This food isn't tasty," she muttered. Hearing this, Jiang decided to find something more suitable for her. He reached out, summoning a map. As he examined it with Little Nine, he recalled how generous Uncle Wang had been, providing him with most of the equipment, a crucial storage ring, and this map everything he needed for the desert. Jiang set off across the bridge. According to Uncle Wang, the wilderness was influenced by the power of the heavenly way, rendering all electronic devices useless. It was like an apocalyptic zone where monsters constantly migrated to new nests. Maps had an extremely short lifespan, and without the latest intelligence, locating monsters, let alone bosses, was difficult. Firebirds and thunder rhinos were common and easy to track due to their movement patterns. However, one area on the map was marked with a question mark, indicating a dangerous high-risk nest. Uncle Wang had advised him to avoid it at all costs. Instead, he recommended a goblin dungeon, which had lower-level monsters and fewer competitors, a perfect hunting ground for Zhang. Gripping the map tightly, Zhang smiled. With this in hand, he could find the dungeon quickly. Just as he was lost in thought, a voice called out, ordering him to stop. Instantly alert, Zhang turned around. A man wearing a cloak approached, placing a firm hand on Zhang's shoulder and staring at him aggressively. "I've been calling you. Why are you ignoring me?" the man demanded. "I just wanted to ask if you've seen a girl with golden hair around here." Zhang's eyes darkened as he coldly replied, "I haven't." Then, with a murderous edge to his voice, he added, "Watch your mouth." At that moment, the poisonous mist from Little Nine began emanating from Zhang's shoulder, creeping onto the man's hand. Startled, the man quickly pulled away, confusion flashing across his face as he inspected his hand. He clenched his teeth, wondering, was this poison? But how? Zhang shouldn't have reached level 10 yet. However, the man was a level 27 main defense warrior. Zhang shouldn't have been able to harm him. Turning his back, Zhang walked away, casually advising the man to find a healer quickly. His poison was difficult to cure. With a smirk, he added, "And take care of your brain." The man's face twisted in anger. "Did I give you permission to leave?" he bellowed. Zhang stopped and turned his head, his gaze now murderous. The man stepped forward, his body emanating a powerful aura, eyes locked onto Zhang like a predator. "How dare you lay a hand on the Z family?" he growled. Zhang's mind raced. Was this man referring to the Z family from the Battle of Heaven? Upon hearing the man's words, Zhang locked eyes with him and quickly grasped what was about to unfold. His instincts had been right, the man lunged at him with full force. But Zhang, already anticipating the move, smoothly shifted his weight and dodged to the side. The attacker's punch met the ground instead, shattering it into fragments. As Zhang moved through the air, distancing himself from his opponent, he raised a hand to his face, his gaze sharp and calculating. He pondered what the Z family saw in this man's aggressive demeanor. Something felt off. The man was seething with rage, his teeth clenched tightly. Fixing a murderous stare on Zhang, he charged at him with incredible speed. Drawing his sword, he grudgingly acknowledged Zhang's agility. Seeing the situation escalate, Zhang removed his hood and extended his hand outward. Instantly, a poisonous mist began to swirl, a manifestation of Little Nine's presence. Zhang's eyes bore into his opponent as he calmly instructed Little Nine that restraint was no longer necessary. The mist thickened, and from within it, Little Nine's figure emerged, her own gaze murderous as she acknowledged his command with a simple, "Understood." The sight of the mist only fueled the man's aggression. He shouted at Zhang, questioning whether he really thought the same trick would work on him again. Just as Zhang prepared to teach him a lesson, another figure appeared, addressing the enraged man as Zhang Tai and reminding him of the need for discretion. At the sound of this voice, Zhang Tai's expression shifted drastically. Fear flickered in his eyes as he turned his head toward the newcomer. A man with blue hair and a hood stood behind him, his anger palpable. He fixed a cold, unforgiving stare on Zhang Tai and demanded to know why he was here instead of searching for the person he had been assigned to find. Zhang Tai was petrified. His body trembled as he tried to explain, but before he could get a word out, the blue-haired man interrupted him with a look of pure disappointment. "Trash that only causes problems," he muttered. Before Zhang Tai could protest, a brutal punch landed under his chin, sending him staggering back as blood trickled from his nose. This man was from the Z family, his very presence radiating immense power. He turned his attention to Zhang Tai, reminding him with an icy tone that he was nothing more than a dog of the Z family, undeserving of using the name of the Zio family. Overwhelmed, Zhang Tai fell to his knees, bowed his head, and hastily apologized, vowing not to make the same mistake again. With the confrontation seemingly settled, Zhang silently observed the scene, his hood back in place. He hadn't even sensed the blue-haired man's presence, a realization that sent a shiver down his spine. This man was far more dangerous than the previous warrior. Zhang Tai, now regaining some composure, turned to the man and hesitantly asked if he should continue searching for their target. The man barely shifted his head before responding, "No. It's already too late. Besides, I've found the clues I need." He revealed that the girl they sought had fled the city, likely heading for the desert in an attempt to reach the nearest station. Removing his hood, he issued a cold directive: she must not be allowed to reach her destination alive. He ordered Zhang Tai to recall all scattered servants and follow him into the desert. Zhang Tai pressed both hands to his chest, lowered his head, and obediently responded, "Understood." Humanity had spread far and wide across the planet, building countless cities. But with the arrival of the awakened era, waves of beasts, secret realms, and dungeons had continuously reshaped civilization. Only the strong ventured into these dangerous lands, seeking power, wealth, and experience. These perilous areas had come to be known as the Wildlands. Zhang pressed forward, traversing the region. Along the way, he encountered swarms of rats. Hours passed, and he arrived at a desolate, ruined part of the city. A creeping sense of uncertainty set in. Was he lost? His destination was the goblin beast's nest, yet despite walking for hours, he had not yet arrived. Night had already fallen. Little Nine, feeling hungry, caught a rat and perched atop Zhang's head, chewing it absent-mindedly before grimacing in disgust. "It tastes terrible," she concluded, realizing she couldn't eat just anything. Zhang had seen many monsters throughout his journey, yet now, in this eerie, desolate place, he couldn't spot a single strong one. The monsters here provided minimal devouring value, and if he failed to find a proper beast nest soon, he would risk delaying his entry into the night watch. As he walked, his expression darkened, lost in deep thought. Suddenly, ominous clouds gathered above, and moments later, rain began to pour. Something felt off. Unbeknownst to Zhang, a giant spider had been lurking nearby, its many eyes fixed on him. Slowly, it descended, exuding a murderous aura. Zhang extended his hand outward, allowing raindrops to gather in his palm. He realized at once this wasn't ordinary rain. The magical fluctuations in the air signified the presence of beast slayers. A smirk tugged at his lips. Though they had stumbled upon the beast nest by accident, luck was on their side. Now, he only needed to find the right monster to fully charge his devouring bar. Sensing movement behind him, Zhang turned his head and locked eyes with the monstrous spider. They stared at each other in silence. Little Nine materialized beside him, her gaze fierce. "Want me to handle this?" she asked. Zhang glanced at the monster and shook his head. "No need. It's not that strong, just larger than the usual ones." Taking advantage of the moment, the spider lunged, its razor-sharp legs poised to strike. But Zhang was faster. With minimal effort, he dodged with quick, fluid movements, leaping effortlessly to evade its attacks. Then, seizing an opening, he gathered his strength and launched himself into the air. In an instant, he was above the spider, his fist clenched tightly. The spider, sensing imminent danger, recoiled in terror, unable to comprehend what was happening. Zhang's fist came crashing down, striking the monster with immense force. The impact sent shockwaves through the ground, shattering it into pieces. The beast lay lifeless beneath him. Lost in thought, Zhang barely registered Little Nine's voice as she placed a hand on her forehead and called out to him. "More monsters are coming." Snapping out of his trance, Zhang turned his head. His eyes widened in surprise. Zhang's powerful strike had drawn the attention of all the monsters lurking in the area. As he stood atop the defeated creature's corpse, the giant spiders began closing in. Without hesitation, he extended his hand to the side, summoning the poisonous mist and calling forth the dagger he had obtained earlier from the secret realm. With a cold, determined gaze, he turned to Little Nine and told her it was time to enjoy a good meal. Both of them locked eyes with the approaching spiders, their expressions fierce. He asked if she was ready, and without hesitation, she confirmed that she was. Activating Little Nine's poisonous mist, Zhang launched himself forward, gaining momentum in an instant. In the blink of an eye, he slashed through the monstrous creatures with his dagger, slicing their bodies apart while the deadly mist spread, infecting them as they fell. With each enemy defeated, their power grew. If they continued at this pace, they could level up at least twice more before heading back. In mere moments, the battlefield was covered with lifeless monsters. Those who hadn't been killed outright succumbed to the corrosive mist that devoured their bodies from the inside out. As the last creature fell, a pile of corpses surrounded Zhang and Little Nine. Zhang approached the remains and instructed Little Nine to devour them all. Overjoyed, she spread her arms wide in excitement and thanked him. Just as she was about to begin, she suddenly turned her gaze to the side, her expression shifting. She informed him that something big, powerful, and delicious was approaching. Hearing this, Zhang followed her line of sight. Seeing the excitement in her eyes, it didn't take long for him to realize the boss was coming. Fixing his gaze in the direction of the approaching presence, he extended his hand, activating the poisonous mist once more. With a deadly stare, he gave the order to attack. The boss's silhouette began emerging through the dense fog, its massive form slowly becoming visible. Little Nine wasted no time, unleashing her attack as commanded. Within seconds, agonizing screams echoed through the air. Something felt off. John's expression shifted as he caught an unexpected detail. The boss's voice sounded distinctly feminine. Confused, he turned to get a better look. A realization struck him. Little Nine had made a mistake. The figure approaching wasn't the boss at all, it was a woman. Due to Zhang's unexpected attack, part of her clothing had been torn, and within seconds, she collapsed onto the ground, unconscious. Standing over her, Zhang observed in silence, his mind racing with questions. What kind of magical creature was this? Several seconds later, the woman regained consciousness, opened her eyes, and while looking at the sky with a surprised expression, she began to wonder where she was and what was happening. She started to sit up with the help of one hand, placed the other on her head, and as she gradually regained consciousness, she began to wonder what kind of place this was. She remembered not having come here. While she had her hand on her head and was slowly trying to understand the situation, Zhang approached her, sat down next to her, rested his elbows on his knees, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile, asked if she was awake. Upon hearing Zhang's voice, she became alert and began to wonder who he was. Without wasting a second, she stood up and hopped away from him. She adopted an offensive stance and, while looking at Zhang, she asked him who he was and also requested that he not approach her. He stood up, turned his body toward her, and with a calm voice, he asked her not to worry since he was just a job changer who had come to the desert to fight monsters. He also added that he hadn't come to harm her. Upon looking more closely, she remembered who Zhang was. She placed a hand on her chest, began pointing at Zhang with the other, and while staring at him intently, she told him that she knew he was the one who had attacked her before. Upon hearing this, Zhang became somewhat nervous, closed his eyes, and with a smile, apologized to her, explaining that he had mistaken her for a monster. Upon seeing that Zhang was quite attractive, she couldn't help but blush. She turned her head toward him and asked how anyone could say that beautiful girls like her resembled monsters. She couldn't help but call him presumptuous. She entered into panic, quickly started touching her head and face to see if her nose and ears were still where they should be. Zhang simply stayed silently observing her. He had used all his strength when he attacked her, and now, seeing that she still had so much vitality and was acting as if nothing had happened, he began to wonder who she was and how she could withstand his attack. Several seconds later, after checking that she had no injuries, she calmed down. Then, she reached out to the side, and the golden ring on her finger began to shine and emit a green energy. This ring was like a kind of clock, which started projecting the time. Upon seeing the time, she realized that she had wasted too much time. She turned her back on Zhang and, while walking away from him, decided to leave quickly before they caught her. While she was slowly moving away, Zhang simply remained silent. He began to stare at her intently and started wondering why she was running away and who the people chasing her were. The woman moved away from him a little but suddenly stopped abruptly. She put her hand on her mouth and started biting her nails. Zhang didn't take long to realize that something was wrong. He approached the woman, and seeing that she was very nervous, asked if there was any problem. As terror started to take hold of her, she slightly turned her head back, closed her eyes, and forced a smile at him. She replied that there were some monsters ahead, and since she wasn't very good at fighting, she decided to retreat and let Jang deal with the monsters. In a matter of seconds, she stopped being nervous, turned her back to him again, waved goodbye, and told him that this was it before deciding to leave. Upon seeing this, Jang's expression changed drastically. With a confused look, he started looking at the woman and thought that her acting skills were truly a pity. At that moment, it started to rain, and the woman left. Jang began walking around the area and thought that if there were monsters ahead, it was good because this was exactly what he wanted. Since these monsters were not opponents for him, although they gave him devouring points, there was a problem. Jang slightly turned his head to one side, and with a serious look, he thought that dealing with other job changers was going to be difficult. The desert had always been a lawless place where many people dedicated themselves to killing and stealing goods. He began to question whether it was a good idea to capture the woman from before and ask her again. While Jang was lost in his thoughts, little Nine appeared. She started pointing ahead with her finger, and with a serious look, she informed him that there were many monsters approaching from that side. Far from being scared or running away, Jang was happy. He turned his head slightly toward her, and upon hearing that there were many monsters, he told her that this was great. His happiness didn't last long. He turned his head to the side, and upon seeing what was in front of him, he was shocked. In front of him, hundreds of giant spiders appeared, just like the ones he had just defeated. Among them was one even bigger than the rest, which started to look at him with a murderous gaze. As Jang's body was surrounded by powerful energy, he began to look at the spiders and thought that this wasn't good for him. Fighting against some of them wouldn't be a problem, but now that there were so many spiders, he wouldn't be able to confront them. While the giant spiders were getting closer to him, with a serious look, he began to stare at them fixedly and thought that the woman was not lying. Despite being surrounded by monsters, he felt relieved. He preferred to fight against these monsters rather than against the job changers. The giant spiders became enraged and, with a murderous look, they gained momentum and began to advance quickly toward him. Upon seeing this, Jang couldn't help but feel happy, as he had no reason not to want the devouring value that was approaching him. Jang unsheathed the two daggers, and as his body emitted a powerful and suffocating energy, he began to stare fixedly at the monsters, giving little Nine the command to activate the poisonous mist. She did not disobey the order and responded with an understood. At that moment, her poisonous mist began to emerge from the daggers he was holding. In the blink of an eye, the giant spiders approached him, opened their mouths, and prepared to attack. While Jang's body was surrounded by poisonous mist, he stood still for several seconds. One of the giant spiders tried to attack him, but Jang moved at an incredible speed and, using the daggers and little Nine's poisonous mist, he gained momentum and, in the blink of an eye, pierced its body, splitting it in half and infecting it with the poisonous mist in the process. While he was in the air, he slightly turned his head back and, while staring fiercely at the monsters with a killer look, he thought this was strange because he didn't know why these monsters had become much faster than before. While Jang was distracted, another giant spider gained momentum and began to advance toward him at high speed. As it slowly approached him, it started staring at him with a murderous look and prepared to attack. Jang didn't take long to feel the presence of the giant spider. Quickly, he slightly turned his head back, and upon seeing that it was trying to attack by surprise, he was somewhat surprised, but for the giant spider's bad luck, Jang was not going to stand idly by. Just before it could make a move, in the blink of an eye, Jang cut its body into pieces using the daggers. The pieces of its body fell to the ground, and several seconds later, Jang landed on the ground while he was holding the two daggers with both hands and his body was releasing the poisonous mist of little Nine. With a murderous look, he began to stare at its corpse and realized that this wasn't right. Although he had reacted in time to the attack and had ended its life in the blink of an eye, he had received a small cut on his abdomen in the process. At that moment, the small spiders began to advance rapidly toward him, and he didn't take long to realize that these monsters were actually cooperating with each other. Upon closer inspection, Jang saw a spider that was very different from the rest. This spider had 6 eyes and was much larger, so he quickly came to the conclusion that this spider was the boss. Upon seeing this, he began to question whether this boss was commanding the others. In the blink of an eye, thousands of spiders appeared and surrounded Jang. While his body was releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist, he started staring at the boss and, instead of running away, he simply stood still. Jang finally understood that the thousands of monsters living in this area had the same strength strategy, both in numbers and tactics, so it was not surprising that no one came here. With a serious look, Jang began to stare at the boss and thought that the only way to defeat these small monsters was by killing the boss. Upon seeing the number of monsters present, he thought this was going to be a bit difficult. While he was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine emerged through the poisonous mist and placed her hand on his shoulder, getting his attention. As she slowly manifested herself with a serious look on her face, she began to stare directly at the boss and explained to Jang that she was able to understand the situation. She revealed that these monsters were trying to challenge their master. Upon hearing this, Jang became somewhat confused. He turned his head slightly toward her and asked what she was talking about. Little Nine thought that these monsters were really arrogant. She extended her hands to the sides, started looking up at the sky, opened her mouth, and let out a loud roar. Upon hearing Little Nine's roar, the spiders finally realized that she was the insect mother, and without a second thought, all the little spiders began to flee. Seeing the spiders fleeing in disarray, Jang was somewhat surprised and started wondering if the reason could be that these monsters were also insects. Little Nine approached Jang, slightly turned her head toward him, and informed him that she had severed the connection between the boss and the little spiders. Jang did not expect that Little Nine's skills could be used in this way. Now that the monsters were disoriented, it was going to be much easier for him to defeat them. He extended the two daggers to the sides, and while staring at the boss with a murderous look, he praised Little Nine for doing a good job and decided that it was time to finish off the boss once and for all. Upon hearing this, Little Nine began to return to her original form. She started staring at the boss with a murderous look and replied with an "Understood, Master." While Jang's body was releasing the poisonous mist from Little Nine, he gathered momentum, took a big leap, and ordered her to follow closely. In the blink of an eye, using his daggers, he ended the lives of several monsters, cutting their bodies into pieces. He no longer had to worry about anything since, without the boss's control, these monsters were in disarray. Jang began to move at a high speed toward the monsters, and using his daggers, he started cutting their bodies into pieces. Now that the monsters were scattered and disorganized, they no longer posed a threat to him, so he didn't need to waste any more time. In a matter of seconds, Jang finished off several monsters. Then, he gathered momentum, took a big leap, and as he was advancing quickly toward the boss, he thought that now there was only one objective left. The boss opened its mouth, and with a murderous look, it began to stare at Jang and roar. Jang decided not to back down and returned the gaze. He prepared himself to attack and thought that the boss was the one who could provide the highest devouring value. The boss tried to defend itself, but it was in vain. Just before it could make a move, Jang descended upon it and swiftly attacked its head with both daggers, infecting it with Little Nine's poisonous mist in the process. Despite the difference in size, within seconds it lost its life and fell to the ground. Jang landed on top of the boss's corpse as he held both daggers in his hands. His body began to emit the venomous mist of Little Nine. He stared fixedly at its lifeless body and decided that it was time to breed the swarm of insects. Jang approached the boss's corpse and stared at it intently, unable to believe he had finally defeated it. At that moment, a system window appeared, congratulating him for leveling up. He was now level 14, with a power evaluation of 127 stars. The passive abilities and level up effects were still in effect. Jang clenched his fist, and it began to glow. He lowered his head slightly, smiling as he thought about how his strength had increased. With 127 stars, his combat power was almost equivalent to that of a level 25 professional in the combat class. He turned his head and realized that all he had to do now was devour the monster corpses and gain devouring points. Seeing how powerful Jang was, and sensing the strength of the mother insect, the small spiders began to flee. They were intelligent creatures and knew they had no chance against him. Upon seeing them escape, Jang thought that there was no longer any threat. He soon realized that the spiders had understood the situation and were fleeing. Although he wanted to kill them for points, he decided against it, as the most important thing now was to start breeding insects. Zhang began walking toward the monster corpses, and slowly, Little Nine started to manifest through the poisonous mist. With a killer look, Zhang stared at the boss's corpse, clenched his fist tightly, and extended his other hand toward the sky, telling Little Nine that it now belonged to her. She thanked him and returned to her natural form before leaping toward the boss's corpse to devour it. A system window appeared, granting him 600 devouring points. As Little Nine enjoyed her meal, Zhang turned his body to the side and thought about how elite monsters like the boss were different. They provided a much higher devouring value. It didn't take long for him to conclude that hunting and breeding insects was a good way to become stronger and hunt more elite monsters. Moments later, another system window appeared, informing him that the devouring value was full. The system asked if he wanted to start the insect breeding process. Zhang was amazed at how quickly the devouring value had filled up and realized that elite monsters gave far more points than normal monsters. A few seconds later, Little Nine returned to her human form, knelt before him, and asked if she could continue following him with much stronger power. Zhang, his body emanating a powerful aura, paused for several seconds, lost in thought. He then smiled and decided it was time to start breeding the insects. At that moment, a system window appeared, informing him that Little Nine had started the first generation of mass insect breeding. Both Zhang's and Little Nine's bodies emitted a wave of energy, and the system informed him that the accelerated growth of talents and the blessing of growth for all things were in effect. Zhang gazed at Little Nine, realizing that his passive skills were very effective at accelerating insect breeding. Several seconds later, a mark appeared on his hand. Upon seeing this, he realized it was a new ability. His assumption was correct when the system granted him two new exclusive abilities, Insect Nest and Dominion. Another system window appeared to inform him that the insect breeding had been accelerated and there were only 8 seconds left. Zhang looked up to the sky and was shocked by what he saw. Little Nine was standing in front of him, hands extended to the sides, and in the blink of an eye, thousands of insects appeared, flying around them. The system congratulated him for successfully completing the breeding of the first swarm, totaling 2,300 insects. Zhang smiled, impressed by the quantity. He couldn't believe the first breeding cycle had produced over 2,000 offspring. This was only the first generation, and he wondered what would happen in future generations. One of the insects approached him, and sensing its presence, he caressed its head. He liked the insects, but their abilities were different from Little Nine's. He noticed that the insects had gained new skills, including poisonous mist, which corroded and devoured everything it touched, camouflage, which allowed them to blend using the reflection of their wings, frenzy, which increased strength and speed by temporarily consuming devouring points, and self-destruction, which let the insect explode, releasing toxins and causing massive damage. Zhang thought the camouflage and self-destruction abilities were quite useful. While he was lost in thought, Little Nine approached from behind, giving him a hug. She smiled and caught his attention. Zhang smiled back and, feeling at ease, turned to her and caressed her head. She seemed to have changed, but not much. Little Nine closed her eyes, placed her hands on her chest, and smiled as she informed him that she had finished breeding the insects. She then took Zhang's arm with both hands and told him she wanted to rest. Curious, Zhang asked what she meant by resting. At that moment, her body began to disappear. Zhang was confused as he turned his head toward his hand and wondered where she had gone. A system window then appeared, informing him that Little Nine had returned to the insect nest. Zhang smiled, feeling relieved. The system space was incredible and could accommodate swarms of insects. It didn't matter how many swarms there were, they could all hide within the system, meaning Zhang no longer had to worry about being discovered. The insect nest was a new ability he had acquired, granted at maximum level, which meant it couldn't be leveled up. Zhang activated Little Nine's mark, looking at his hand and seeing that she was sleeping peacefully. He realized that after reproduction, insects needed to sleep. He remembered he had also acquired a new ability called Dominion and decided to test it. He extended his hand to the side and activated the skill. His body emitted a powerful, suffocating energy, and his eyes shone. As he activated Dominion, the insects around him turned their heads toward him, gazing at him with a murderous look. Zhang turned his head toward them and, realizing how the ability worked, extended his hand toward the sky. the insects began to gather. This ability allowed Zhang to control the swarm, making it as easy as moving an arm. Using this skill, Zhang could also perceive the world through the insect's senses. Looking around, he could see that the area was filled with hidden monsters, ready to attack. Zhang smiled, realizing that his insects were just as excited. With a killer look, he ordered the swarm to attack, testing their new abilities. Thousands of insects destroyed a nearby building to attract the attention of all nearby monsters. The plan worked, and the monsters started approaching. Zhang didn't wait and began moving toward them, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist. The monsters realized what was happening and tried to escape, but it was too late. The poisonous mist rapidly reached them and started corroding their bodies, causing immense pain. Soon, all the affected monsters perished and fell to the ground. With the monsters dead, the poisonous mist began devouring them. Zhang approached the corpses and observed them intently as the swarm took over. The reach of the poisonous mist had grown larger, and it devoured its targets faster and more extensively. With his ability to share vision through Dominion, Zhang could now see everything the insects saw. Common monsters could no longer hide from the swarm. Watching Little Nine's poisonous mist devour the monster corpses, Zhang smiled, realizing he would soon be able to breed more insects. He remembered he hadn't checked how much devouring value was needed for the next breeding cycle. Opening the system window, Zhang was shocked by the information that appeared. Wondering what was happening, he prepared for the next part of his journey. Scene change. At the same time, a man arrived at an abandoned warehouse near where Zhang was and informed his leader that he had already returned. Upon seeing that he had come back, the leader asked him why he had taken so long and also gave him the order to quickly report on what was really happening in the spider's nest. This man was wearing a hood, had green hair, and was quite scared. He informed his leader that the spider's nest had been annihilated by someone mysterious and unknown, with a crushing annihilation that left not a single monster alive. His superior, a tall man with braids, couldn't believe what his ears had just heard. He turned his head toward his subordinate and, with a surprised look, asked if this was some kind of joke. He couldn't believe that someone had completely annihilated the spider's nest. Another man who was by their side approached them, and upon hearing this, he was shocked. The man with green hair approached them and, with a serious look, replied that this was true, adding that the city of monsters was in ruins. Upon hearing this, their leader put his hand on his chin, began to look toward the ground, and was unable to believe that the nest had been razed to ashes. This was too terrifying to hear. Although at first, he questioned if the culprit could be a member of the Night Watch, he later dismissed this idea as it was not the style of the Night Watch. He came to the conclusion that the responsible party must be some secret operation from a hidden family or a powerful assault group. He decided that it was best for them to retreat now. For them, this was a shame. They had been entrusted with the mission of filling a bottle with the venom of a wolf spider. Now that they had failed, he decided to make up for the losses on the way back by robbing some unfortunate ones. Upon hearing this, the man next to him turned his head toward him and couldn't help but sweat in panic. While they were talking, someone opened the door of the abandoned warehouse. Upon hearing the sound of the door opening, the three turned their heads back, and the man with green hair revealed to the other two that they had an unexpected visitor. Upon hearing this, they couldn't help but wonder who this person could be. A man put his hand on the door and, as he slowly opened it, told them that he had finally found other professionals. Upon hearing this, the leader asked him who he was. This person was Jay. He entered the warehouse, started walking toward them, dropped an arm, extended his hand toward them, and with a calm look asked them not to worry since he had only come here to level up. He also added that he had come to exchange some food with them. Upon hearing this, their leader felt relieved as Zhang had come alone. He turned his head toward him, started looking into his eyes, and with a smile agreed to exchange some food with him, adding that food in the desert wasn't cheap. After saying this, he asked Zhang what he wanted to exchange. The expression of the man next to him changed drastically. He adopted an offensive stance and began to stare at Zhang. Zhang approached the leader, started looking into his eyes, and with a smile asked him not to worry, adding that he had some very good items to exchange. Upon hearing this, the man's expression changed drastically once again. He began to look at Jiang and couldn't help but smile and feel curious about what he wanted to exchange. The leader ordered Jiang to show him what objects he had at that moment. The two men surrounded Jiang and, with a smile, started unsheathing their swords. He simply turned his head slightly toward them and couldn't help but smile. From the beginning, he knew he couldn't trust them, so without thinking twice, he activated the ring and extended his hand toward them. In the blink of an eye, several spiders came out of the ring and, with a piercing gaze, started looking at the men. Jiang turned his back on them and, with a mocking voice, asked if his products were good. Upon seeing the spiders, the men sheathed their swords again, took a few steps back, and went on high alert. The men began to look at the spiders and couldn't help but sweat and feel fear. They were aware that these were wolf spiders. They started to question if they had not been annihilated along with the spider's nest. Thinking this, they began to wonder if Jiang was the person who had killed all the spiders. The current level of Jiang Chen was 17. He slightly turned his head toward them, started looking at them with an overwhelming gaze, and with a smile asked them not to think that he didn't know what they wanted to do. After saying this, Jiang sat on a rock, slightly turned his head toward them, and calmly revealed that he was very angry now, so he advised them to grab their weapons and leave right away from here. Upon hearing this, the three men grabbed their belongings, turned their backs to Jan, started running, and apologized for bothering him, adding that they were leaving right away. Several minutes later, once the men had fled from the warehouse, Jiang extended his hand to the side, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist. He gave the order for the insects to come out. While Jiang was sitting on the rock with one arm resting on his knee, he reached up and used the poisonous mist to release two insects. They began flying around him with a murderous look in their eyes, searching for any hidden threat. Jiang began to drink a little bit of soup that the men had left. He was getting hungrier and thought he should have known better. When he first obtained Little Nine, he didn't expect leading the swarm of insects to have such side effects. When drinking the soup, a system wind appeared, and Jiang's devouring value increased. Now he had 2,768 points out of 1 million. The system advised him to increase the value as soon as possible. Originally, he had thought that the devouring value would increase faster after the insect swarm doubled, but he did not expect that the devouring value of the next reproduction would also double. This complicated things a lot for John, since now the devouring value that a boss could provide was just a drop in the bucket. Even if he eliminated all the beast nests outside the city, it wouldn't be enough to fill up the devouring value for the next reproduction. Jiang started looking down at the ground and sank into his thoughts. He had heard that the beast nests and secret realms controlled by the Night Watch were not going to be made public, which meant that if he wanted to increase his swarm's devouring value, then he had to join the Night Watch as soon as possible. He began to look at his hand and saw that Little Nine had not yet woken up. Upon seeing this, he quickly came to the conclusion that the burden of reproduction was not small. At that moment, Jiang started to feel someone's presence. Immediately, his expression changed drastically as he turned his head to one side and wondered what this person was doing here. He stood up, clenched his fist tightly, slightly turned his head to one side, and assumed an offensive stance. He could smell the scent of battle and how there were a lot of people chasing after her. He didn't know what was happening here and why she was being pursued. Several seconds later, a girl who was using an invisibility spell entered the warehouse, bumped into Jiang, and fell to the ground. She was the same girl as before. She supported herself with one hand on the floor and began touching her head with the other because it hurt. Jiang turned his head toward her and, with a confused look, began to wonder why he had encountered her again. While the girl was lying on the ground, she placed one hand on the floor, put the other on her chest, lifted her head toward Jiang, and immediately recognized him as the boy from the spider's nest. She started looking at him with a frightened gaze and asked him not to tell anyone that he had seen her here. Upon hearing this, Jiang couldn't help but be shocked. He turned his head toward her and couldn't help but look at her with a surprised expression. She had been so close to him, and he hadn't even been able to sense her presence. It didn't take him long to come to the conclusion that the person the man with blue hair was chasing was her. He decided to take the girl somewhere safe, but at that moment, he felt someone's presence. Quickly, he turned his head toward the warehouse entrance and, with a serious look, thought it was already too late to leave. Several seconds later, several people entered the warehouse. Among them were Jiang Tai and the man with blue hair who was part of the Zio family. They began to walk toward Jiang, and Jiang Tai didn't take long to recognize him. He couldn't help but feel fear and chills. He pointed at Jiang with his finger and informed his leader that he was the same guy they had encountered before. The man with blue hair put his hand in his pants pocket, started staring at Jiang, and with a smile praised his subordinate for having a good sense of smell. Jiang sat back down on the rock, rested his hands on his knees, and remained silent. Upon looking more closely, the man realized that this place was empty, and Jiang was actually camping alone. With a gaze filled with anger, Janai began to look at Jiang and asked him if a girl had entered the warehouse a moment ago. He ordered him to respond immediately or else this time he was going to kill him. The man with blue hair started looking at Jiang, put his hand in front of Janai, and with a smile asked him to wait. He approached him, began to sit on the rock in front of Jiang. He knew that he was from the spiritual master class. He noticed that Jiang had leveled up very quickly. It had been less than a day since they last saw each other, and he was already level 16. The man became more and more interested in Jiang. He decided to set this topic aside and explained that he now had something urgent to do. While he was sitting on the rock, Jiang simply remained silent. He sat on the rock, rested an arm on his knee, drew his sword, began aiming at Jiang's neck, and with a serious look asked him if he had seen a girl with black hair around here. His subordinates approached, stood behind him, and remained silent. Jiang simply remained calm, started looking into the man's eyes, and quickly concluded that, based on the aura emanating from his body, his level was very high, surpassing level 30. Seeing that he could accurately detect his class and level, he thought this man must have some detection equipment with him. Jiang turned his head to the side, began pointing toward the back door of the warehouse with his finger, and explained to the man that he had just seen someone's shadow going in that direction. He also added that because he wasn't of the perceptive class, he wasn't sure if that was the person they were looking for. Upon hearing this, the man started to stand up and tentatively decided to believe him. He also advised Jiang to be more honest. Upon hearing this, Jiang turned his head toward him and was somewhat surprised. He stood up, turned his back to Jiang, slightly turned his head toward him, began to look into his eyes, and with a murderous gaze warned him that if he found out that he had helped that girl, then the Z family wouldn't let him go. Upon hearing this, Janai also turned his head slightly toward him and couldn't help but smile. Several seconds later, the man and his subordinates began to leave the warehouse. Jiang turned his body toward them and, as he watched them gradually move away, he remembered that the Z family was the most powerful family in Jianggu. With a penetrating gaze, he started to look at the man with blue hair and thought that the clans in the city had a long history and all of them were feudal officials. They were also extremely mysterious and rarely entered the world unless a great disaster occurred. Some powerful men in the family could even split the heavens and the earth. This guy was more powerful than Jiang had thought. For him, it wasn't good to be remembered by someone like that. Several seconds later, Jiang slightly turned his head toward the warehouse exit and, seeing that the men had already left, he decided to leave as well since it wasn't good for him to stay in this place. The girl came out of her hiding place, approached Jiang, put her hands on her hips, and thanked him for saving her. Jiang stood up, turned his body toward her, and remained silent. He quickly grabbed her arm, and upon seeing this, the girl panicked and started wondering what he had planned to do. Dee approached her, started looking into her eyes with an aggressive gaze, and told her that she almost fooled him like last time. Since he had helped her again this time, he asked how she had gotten in trouble with these people. With Jiang so close to her, she couldn't help but blush. She began looking at him and explained that her family had a huge debt. The guy planned to take away the things they were escorting and kill them all, but he didn't expect her to escape. He was afraid that the news would leak out, so he was chasing after her for this reason. After explaining this, she asked Jiang if he wanted to silence her. Upon hearing this, Jiang let go of her hand, turned his back on her, and began to walk away from her. Upon seeing this, she placed a hand on her chest, extended the other toward him, and told him that she would always remember that he had helped her and that she would also be very grateful to him in the future. While he was distancing himself from her, he closed his eyes, clenched his fists tightly, and told her that he didn't want to get involved in her affairs. At that moment, Jiang abruptly stopped, opened his eyes, and thought that something was not right. The girl also noticed this, and her expression changed drastically. With a fearful look, she revealed to him that someone had just placed a barrier spell around the warehouse. At that moment, someone who was outside the warehouse gave the order to their subordinates to come out. Zhang started looking toward the entrance of the warehouse and thought that now it was impossible to escape. He knew that even if the girl said she didn't know him, they wouldn't believe her anymore. He activated his insect perception and began walking around the area, realizing they were surrounded on all sides. With a serious look, Zhang began to stare toward the entrance of the warehouse, ready to face any opponent on the other side. The girl got scared and placed her hand on her chest. Several seconds later, the man with blue hair and his subordinates appeared. Their bodies started emanating a killer aura. With a penetrating gaze, they began to look at Jan, ready to finish him off. He knew that Zhang had lied to him. He approached him, stared into his eyes, and ordered him to hand over the girl. He called Zhang a bastard and told him that he knew he had lied to him. With a serious look, he gave the order to his subordinates to catch the girl. Zhang simply stared at him and remained silent. Upon seeing the man with blue hair, the girl's expression changed drastically. She began to look at him, panicking and feeling terrified at the same time. She explained to Zhang that he had already taken everything the Luo family owned. After saying this, she asked the man why he wanted to kill her so badly. He calmly looked at her and asked if he really needed a reason. Upon hearing that she belonged to the Luo family, Zhang turned his head toward her and stared at her intently with a serious expression. Zhang and the girl were on the second floor of the abandoned warehouse, while the man with blue hair and his subordinates were on the first floor. She clenched her fist, extended one hand to the side, and stared at the man. She told him that if he killed her, the Luo family would never forgive him and would never let him live in peace. Zhang, standing behind her, dropped his arms to his sides and continued to watch the man silently. Hearing this, the man with blue hair burst into laughter. He asked her if she truly believed that a family like the Luo family was capable of such a thing. At that moment, his subordinates began to smile at the girl. With one hand on his waist, he lowered his head, placed the other hand over his face, and laughed at the thought that a second-rate family with a little money took themselves so seriously. He revealed to the girl that without the protection of the Zhou family and their ancestors 100 years ago, the Luo family would have been annihilated long ago. Upon hearing this, one of his subordinates unsheathed his sword, and the others began to laugh. Zhang Tai crossed his arms, stared at Zhang intently, and couldn't help but smile. After saying this, the man with blue hair removed his hand from his face, lifted his head, and with a serious look told her that in the eyes of the Z family, they were no different from humble peasants. He added that for him, they were just cattle that the Z family could slaughter. Hearing this, Zhang turned his head toward him and stared at him with a look filled with hatred. He couldn't help but become enraged, unable to believe that someone could be so arrogant. The man extended his hand forward, and his palm began to emit a powerful red energy that rose toward the sky. He looked at the girl and, with a smile, asked her what the Z family could investigate if there was nothing to find. Several seconds later, the energy he had released began to create a powerful barrier around the abandoned warehouse. This ability was called the Dragon Prison Formation of the Z family. The girl looked up at the sky, placed a hand on her chest, clenched her fist, and couldn't help but feel astonished and panicked. She now had no idea how she was going to escape. Zhang lifted his head and, upon seeing the barrier, couldn't help but be amazed. To him, the man with blue hair was someone very interesting. While Zhang and the girl were standing on the second floor of the abandoned warehouse, Zhang Tai unsheathed his sword, stared at the girl, and prepared to attack. He ordered the others to listen carefully to the young master and leave no one alive. The others responded with an understood. The man with blue hair, standing next to Zhang Tai, remained silent. Several seconds later, Zhang Tai prepared to attack, but at that moment, the man with blue hair stepped in front of him and raised his hand to stop him. He then stared at Zhang and, with a smile, told him that the girl from the Luo family must die today. He remained interested in Zhang, fully aware that he possessed the divine rank creation class. While still looking at Zhang, he explained to Zhang Tai that the creation class called Spiritual Master was a very rare profession. Unlike others, he knew what it was. He then reached out his hand to the side and, with a smile, decided to give Zhang the opportunity to obtain everything under the sky today. He extended his hand toward Zhang and ordered him to capture the girl in exchange for sparing his life, so he could serve the Zhao family. After saying this, he asked Zhang what he thought. Hearing this, the girl, who had her hands on her waist, couldn't help but be shocked. Zhang, on the other hand, dropped his arms to his sides and remained silent for several seconds. He then looked down at the ground, smiled, and praised him, saying that the bastards of the Z family were really good at making suggestions. The girl turned her head toward him and panicked, wondering if Zhang was really going to accept his proposal. With a murderous look, Zhang stared at the man with blue hair and rejected his offer, mocking him by telling him that the Zhao family could go to hell. After saying this, he clenched his fists tightly, and while his body released the poisonous mist of Little Nine, he told him with a serious look that he refused. He also asked him if he could come for him if he was looking for a fight. The girl turned her body toward Zhang, brought her hands close to her chest, and upon seeing his body surrounded by the poisonous mist, couldn't help but take a few steps back in terror. She began to wonder what was happening. Hearing that Zhang had rejected his proposal, the man with blue hair became enraged, as this was a dishonor to him. He ordered his subordinates to finish him off. Upon hearing the order, they unsheathed their swords, gained momentum, took a big leap, and began advancing quickly toward Zhang. While in midair, Zhang Tai warned the others to be careful, as Zhang wasn't an easy opponent. Little by little, they got closer, but Zhang simply observed them silently without making any movement. Several seconds later, they approached the second floor. Zhang Tai, upon seeing that Zhang's body was surrounded by poisonous mist, revealed to the others that he could use poison and advised them not to attack directly. Seeing that they were ready to attack, the girl hid behind Zhang. At that moment, Zhang deactivated the poisonous mist, extended his hand toward them, and while his body was surrounded by a green energy, he stared at Zhang Tai with a serious look. He revealed that not only could he use poison, but also the talent ability of his. Seeing this, the girl took several steps back, placed her hand on her chest, turned her head toward Zhang, and couldn't help but feel confused, as she didn't know what this power was. In the blink of an eye, several green spiritual roots began to emerge from the ground. Zhang Tai approached Zhang, grabbed his sword with both hands, and prepared to attack. But at that moment, he looked down at the ground and, upon seeing the spiritual roots, was shocked. He couldn't help but wonder what this ability was. The spiritual roots grew enormous and, in an instant, entangled around Zhang Tai and the others, rendering them immobile. They panicked, as they didn't know what was happening. Zhang, who had his hand extended toward them, revealed that his ability was the evolution of all things. Little by little, the spiritual roots began to tighten around Zhang Tai's body. He quickly grabbed the roots with his hands and stared at Zhang, unable to help but wonder what was happening. Seeing how strong the roots were, he realized that Zhang's class was of divine rank. He was also confused because he remembered that Zhang could use poison as well. Zhang Tai decided not to stand idly by. He unsheathed his sword, held it with both hands, and used all his strength to cut the roots around his body into pieces. Upon seeing this, the others began doing the same. He advised them to attack the roots since they were very fragile. The spiritual roots began to fall to the ground near the man with blue hair, who started pushing them away using his hands. It didn't take long for him to realize what was happening. With a surprised look, he shouted and called Zhang Tai an idiot, explaining that this was just a distraction. He added that Zhang was ready to attack. Zhang took advantage of Zhang Tai and the others being distracted to release the insects, which began to look at them with a penetrating gaze. While his body was surrounded by poisonous mist, he reached out his hand to the side, stared at them intently, and explained that it was already too late. The girl sat on the floor, resting her hand on it, and lifted her head. Upon seeing the insects, she was surprised. While Zhang Tai's subordinates were busy cutting the roots, the insects began to approach them. Zhang Tai turned his head to one side and, upon seeing the insects, his expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but sweat and feel shocked, wondering what these things were. The insects began to move at high speed and started attacking them. Zhang Tai blocked the attack using his sword, but unfortunately for him, the insects were so strong that, in a matter of seconds, they destroyed his sword. Upon seeing this, he was in shock, unable to believe that Zhang had actually destroyed his weapon. upon closer inspection, he realized that it wasn't poisonous mist at all but rather summoned monsters. At that moment, an insect began to approach him from behind and prepared to attack. He lifted his head and, upon seeing this, was surprised. He started screaming and revealed to the others that this poisonous mist actually came from the monsters. He concluded that he couldn't dodge the attack. Zhang, who had his hand extended toward him and was controlling the insect, began to look at him with a murderous gaze and couldn't help but smile, as he had finally caught him. Just before the insect could attack Zhang Tai, someone approached him, put their foot on his shoulder, called him trash, and told him to get lost. Zhang Tai turned his head to the side and, upon seeing this, became somewhat confused. Zhang also became somewhat confused and amazed at the same time. This person was none other than the man with blue hair. He unsheathed his sword, grabbed it with one hand, gained momentum, took a big leap, and as he slowly advanced toward Zhang, he used the first form of King's 9 forms. By doing this, his body began to emit an orange aura. While Zhang's body was surrounded by Little Nine's poisonous mist, he simply remained silent. The girl, who was sitting on the ground next to him, put her hand in front of her mouth and became terrified. Zhang lifted his head toward the man with blue hair and, upon seeing that he was faster than the poisonous mist, couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly and sweat. The man with blue hair used the secret technique of the Zio family called chasing dragons. At that moment, a dragon made of spiritual energy manifested itself and began to stare at Zhang. It clenched its teeth tightly and attacked him. The attack was so powerful that it destroyed the area where Zhang was into pieces and created a smokescreen in the process. While holding the sword with one hand and extending it toward Zhang, the man with blue hair stared at him fixedly and, with a smile, called him a bastard. He knew it was going to be difficult to deal with Zhang, but luckily, his level wasn't very high, and his speed wasn't fast enough. He thought that by using this blade alone, he would be able to defeat him. But to his surprise, several seconds later, once the smoke cleared, his expression changed drastically. He was in shock, as he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Luckily, Zhang was still alive, thanks to the girl using her hidden profession ability called Earth Eternal Shield. She created a shield around them, but as she extended her hands toward the shield, it began to crack. She closed her eyes, and while blood came out of her mouth, she explained to Zhang that she was in a lot of pain. Zhang, who was standing behind her, began to look at her with a surprised and dumbfounded expression. He realized that she was actually a defensive type. The man with blue hair had forgotten about her, but now, seeing that she had blocked his attack using the shield, he couldn't help but become enraged. He started looking at her aggressively, clenched his teeth tightly, and prepared to attack again. Zhang began to look at him and thought that this was a good opportunity to attack. He extended his hand to one side, releasing the poisonous mist. Several seconds later, he landed on the ground. At that moment, several insects began to approach the man with blue hair quickly from behind. One of his subordinates, who was lying on the ground, reached out toward him and caught his attention to warn him to be careful. While holding the sword with one hand, the man with blue hair turned his head back and, upon seeing the insects approaching quickly, became alert. At that moment, he grabbed one of his subordinates by the hood. The subordinate became somewhat confused, as he didn't know what was happening. While holding the sword with one hand, the man with blue hair used his subordinate as a shield. Since the insects were not very smart, they attacked the subordinate instead of him. The insect's attack was so powerful that their bodies were thrown backward. The subordinate was seriously injured, and as his body lay beside him, the man with blue hair placed a knee on the ground, leaned the sword against the ground, rested his arm on the other knee, and began to look down at the ground, coughing. Zhang came down from the second floor and started approaching him. He couldn't help but think that the man with blue hair was a nasty bastard for using one of his own men to block the attack. The insect's attack had pierced the man's chest, and even though he was badly injured and bleeding from his mouth, he was still alive. He began to cough and caught his master's attention. The man with blue hair stood up and started approaching Zhang. He slightly turned his head toward his subordinate and thanked him for enduring the attack for him. He thought that he had not educated him in vain and, upon seeing that he was still alive, couldn't help but praise him and think that he was truly strong. Zhang, who was standing in front of him, simply remained silent. The man with blue hair took out a dragon yuan pill from his pocket, opened his mouth, and ate it. he couldn't believe that he was being forced to use the Dragon Yuan pill. In a matter of seconds, his subordinate lost his life. He began to approach Zhang, dragging the sword on the ground, causing small rocks to slowly float. Upon seeing this, Zhang assumed an offensive stance. On the other side, the girl, sitting next to him and covering the wound on her arm with her hand, remained still. The man with blue hair tightly gripped the sword, pointing it toward Zhang, and with a murderous look, he warned that his next attack would slice Zhang's head into pieces. Zhang simply remained calm, looking at the man in silence, ready to face any attack. As the effects of the Dragon Yuan pill took hold, the elemental energy dragon behind him grew immense, its eyes glowing intensely as it signaled its readiness to attack. He assumed an offensive stance, stomping forcefully on the ground, shattering it into pieces. Gripping his sword tightly, he fixed his fierce gaze on Zhang, determined to end him once and for all. His energy surged so powerfully that the surrounding rocks began to levitate. Zhang, staring at the dragon, felt a wave of terror. He was uncertain whether he could withstand such an attack. Meanwhile, the blue-haired warrior unsheathed his sword, preparing to strike. This time, he resolved to use the second technique of the 9 conquering styles. Channeling his strength, he unleashed the descending dragon's cut, sending a devastating slash toward Zhang. Instantly, his body radiated powerful energy, and the elemental dragon surged forward at lightning speed, its maw widening to consume Zhang. At that moment, a young woman stepped in front of Zhang, extending her hands with a determined expression. She summoned the Earth Eternal Shield once more. Zhang, shielding his face with his elbow, turned to her in astonishment. Despite her injuries, she was willing to take another devastating blow. A green shield manifested around them just as the spiritual dragon struck, shattering part of the ground and engulfing the battlefield in dust and debris. As she struggled to maintain the shield, her hands trembled, and she clenched her teeth. She explained to Zhang that the warrior had consumed the Z family's secret Dragon Yuan pill, exponentially amplifying the dragon's power. Her shield, already weakened, would not hold for long. They were moments away from doom. The cracks in the shield widened, and realizing the imminent collapse, she mustered her last ounce of strength to prolong their survival. Zhang grasped his cloak and observed the spiritual dragon in awe. The blue-haired warrior was far stronger than he had anticipated. Every strike from the dragon carried lethal force. The previous attack had already been overwhelming, he hadn't expected another at this magnitude. The blue-haired warrior leaped toward them, smirking as he saw the shield breaking apart. He unleashed multiple descending dragon cuts, launching a series of ferocious slashes at the shield. Zhang narrowed his eyes, raising his hand toward the sky. In response, he activated the swarm of insects mark. Deciding to show no mercy, he prepared his next move. As the girl's shield finally shattered, thousands of insects emerged from Zhang's palm, swarming into the air. The blue-haired warrior looked up, eyes widening in shock at the sheer number of insects. Clenching his teeth, he tried to comprehend what was happening. As the insects multiplied, Zhang locked eyes with his opponent. "Prepare yourself," he warned. The wounded girl, seated on the ground, pressed a hand to her injured shoulder. She stared at Zhang in disbelief, questioning whether he truly belonged to the legendary creation class. The insects encircled Zhang, their sights set on the blue-haired warrior. Zhang stepped forward and commanded the swarm to attack. Realizing the impending danger, the warrior clenched his jaw in panic. He knew that if the insects struck all at once, he stood no chance. As the swarm charged, he drew his sword and took a defensive stance. With a serious expression, he steeled himself and once again invoked the descending dragon cut. His blade crackled with energy, slicing through the incoming insects. But Zhang had another trick up his sleeve. As the insects were severed, their bodies began regenerating instantly. The warrior's eyes widened in disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered, watching the insects recover and advance again. Desperately, he continued to cut them down, but they would not stay dead. Zhang smirked, releasing a poisonous mist from his body. Extending his hand, he coldly asked, "Do you still think you can win?" The blue-haired warrior hesitated, his confidence wavering. More insects swarmed around him, and the girl behind Zhang watched in stunned silence, awestruck by his power. Enraged by Zhang's taunts, the blue-haired warrior swung his sword furiously, once again summoning the descending dragon cut. He cleaved an insect in half, but the spiritual dragon manifested once more. Opening its massive jaws, the dragon began devouring the insects, preventing them from regenerating. It was a strategic counterattack. However, amidst the chaos, an unnoticed insect struck from behind, sinking its fangs into the warrior's arm. A sharp pain shot through him as poison coursed into his veins, forcing him to drop his sword. He spun around, eyes blazing with desperation. This isn't good, he thought, realizing that with his sword hand poisoned, he was now vulnerable. With no other option, he reached into his garments and pulled out a glowing red object. The insects, sensing an opportunity, rushed toward him. But before they could strike, he raised the object high and activated the jade protection of life. Instantly, a brilliant red energy enveloped his body, forming an impenetrable shield. He sneered at Zhang. Did you truly think you could kill the great Xiao Yuanwu with a mere swarm of insects? Zhang simply remained silent while the insects continued to attack the shield. Yuanwu began to approach them. Upon seeing that he was able to control the insects and bring him to the point of using the ancestral treasure, he couldn't help but praise him for being amazing. He also added that even if Zhang used all his cards up his sleeve, he wouldn't be able to harm him. Seeing the man approaching, the girl stood up and grabbed Zhang by his clothes. Within seconds, he started bleeding from his mouth and approached Zhang with a smile. He decided to make him an offer one last time. As long as Zhang was willing to follow and obey him, he could allow him to join the Zhao family and grant him the Z surname, something many dreamed of achieving. After saying this, he asked Zhang to think it over carefully and not miss out on this opportunity. Zhang began to look at him with a calm gaze and remained silent. Thinking for several seconds, he started to stare fixedly at Yuanwu and couldn't help but get angry when he saw that he had become accustomed to being conceited to the point where he couldn't even see the situation he was in. Upon hearing this, the girl turned her head towards him, and with a confused look, began to wonder what Zhang was up to. He approached Zhang, extended his hand to the side, and with a smile, asked him to stop bragging. It didn't matter to him if Zhang accepted or not, because even if he couldn't kill him today, he could do it any other day. With the influence of the Zhao family throughout the country, he wouldn't be able to hide or confront them. Zhang began to stare at Yuanwu intently, and with a smile, he reminded him of his own words that one couldn't investigate if there was nothing to find. After saying this, he asked him what could happen if he died without leaving any trace. At that moment, a giant tentacle struck the ground. Upon hearing this sound, Yuanwu slightly turned his head back, and with a gaze filled with terror, he started wondering what was happening. This tentacle belonged to the insect mother. She emerged from the swarm of insects and appeared behind them. Upon seeing how enormous she was, the girl fell to the ground. Yuanwu looked up, and upon seeing how huge and terrifying she was, he started sweating. At that moment, Zhang gave her the order to devour him. Upon hearing his command, Little Nine began to approach Yuanwu and thanked Zhang, as she was very hungry. Upon hearing this, Yuanwu's expression changed drastically. He started feeling a fear that he had never felt before in his life. Little Nine began to smile and, using her tentacle, attacked Yuanwu's shield. Due to her enormous strength, his body was sent flying and crashed into the wall, breaking it into pieces. He started screaming in agony, unable to believe that a monster like Little Nine actually existed. He asked Zhang what kind of monster she was. With a calm look, Zhang explained to him that Little Nine had just finished reproducing herself, so he and the jade were exactly what she needed to satisfy her hunger. Little Nine began to repeatedly hit Yuanwu using her tentacle, creating a large curtain of smoke in the process. In a matter of seconds, the shield started breaking into pieces. He opened his mouth and started screaming in pain, questioning why the shield had broken so easily. He began to bleed from his mouth and fell to the ground. He couldn't believe that this was happening. Now the fate of the Z family and the jade were going to disappear. Now that the shield had been broken, Little Nine started to stare at him intently. She began to bring her tentacle closer to him and decided to deliver the final blow. With a cold expression, Zhang remained silently observing this. Little Nine attacked Yuanwu, destroying the ground into pieces in the process. Her attack had been so powerful that all that was left of Yuanwu was a pool of blood. She began to lift the tentacle from the ground, and Zhang thought that no one should find out about this. Since Yuanwu was now dead, he started walking, reached his hand towards the sky, activated the swarm mark, and gave Little Nine the order to transform. Several seconds later, Little Nine transformed, returned to human form, and hugged him. Then she closed her eyes and, with a smile, explained that Yuanwu was delicious. She thanked him and also added that she was the one who loved him the most. The girl who was sitting on the floor turned her head to the side, and upon seeing Little Nine, she couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and scared. Zhang turned his back on her, started to walk away, and decided to take a look at the Z family. At that moment, he turned his head towards her and decided to take care of her. The girl who was sitting on the floor panicked and couldn't help but sweat. She remembered that she now knew his secret, and thinking about this, she couldn't help but wonder if he was going to kill her to keep her silent. This is the... Zhang began to stare at the girl with a serious look and started wondering what he should do with her. At that moment, his body started emitting a poisonous mist, and several insects appeared behind him, staring at the girl, ready to attack. He approached her, looked at the ground, and asked her to give him a good reason not to kill her. Upon seeing this, she panicked, quickly knelt before him, took out some gold coins, bowed her head, and explained that this was all the money she had on her, worth millions, practically her life. She was willing to give it to him in exchange for sparing her life. Zhang picked up a gold coin, looked at the girl, and thought that she had some sincerity. But since she knew too much and also lied, he decided it was best to eliminate her. She stood up, closed her eyes, raised one hand towards the sky, and swore by her name, Leo Sando, that if she lied to him, the heavens could punish her with 5 thunders. Zhang was somewhat confused, as he didn't know whether to believe her name was Leo Sando, since she always told lies without thinking about the consequences. Luo Sando approached him, handed him her identification card, and looked at him with a sincere gaze. She explained that what she was saying was true. She didn't know what her parents were thinking when they gave her this name, but she really wasn't deceiving him. She added that if he still didn't believe her, he could look at her identification card. Zhang took her identification card, brought it closer, and upon looking more closely, he saw a chubby girl. He asked Luo Sando if she was sure she was the same person as in the photo. She grabbed strands of her hair, pretended to have 2 ponytails, closed her eyes, puffed up her cheeks, and explained that the photo had been taken 2 years ago when she hadn't grown yet and hadn't lost weight. Seeing the expression on her face, Zhang turned his head back and started laughing out loud. The insects flying behind him became somewhat confused. Then, he turned his head towards her and, with an intense gaze, explained that he still couldn't trust her and didn't know if she would be able to keep the secret, since after all, this was something only the dead could do. Just before he could finish his sentence, she jumped, used the storage ring, causing a portal to appear. With one hand in the portal, she took out a scroll with the other and started approaching Zhang with a serious look. She asked him not to worry about this. Zhang began to look at the scroll with a surprised expression and asked her what it was. She opened the scroll using both hands and explained that this was a sealing scroll. Once she revealed the secret, she would be executed immediately. She was very afraid of dying, and for this reason, she had taken out the scroll. At that moment, a system window appeared to inform Zhang that she swore to protect his secret with her own life. If she revealed this secret, she would be executed. Upon seeing this, he was somewhat surprised, as he couldn't believe something like this existed in the world. Several seconds later, he picked up the scroll, closed one eye, started looking at it with the other, and decided to accept. Now that she had signed the confidentiality agreement, he decided not to kill her, for now. Upon hearing this, she thanked him. He turned his head towards her and asked how much the scroll cost. She put her finger on her cheek, started looking at him, and revealed that its approximate value was around 10 million. Zhang tightly gripped the scroll, began to approach her, and with a furious look, thought that this meant she had just used the only valuable thing she had in the storage ring. She thought she was going to die, so she started shaking her hands and told him that if he accompanied her home, her parents would treat him well and give him even more rewards. Zhang turned his back on her, started to walk away, and explained that tomorrow morning he had to go to the night watch, so he couldn't waste any more time. After saying this, he wished her good luck. She stood up and, while watching him slowly move away, caught his attention and asked him to take her home, since her house was much closer than the night watch headquarters. There was a teleportation station near her house, and she assured him that he would arrive on time. Although at first he refused, he later decided to listen to her. Several hours later, they arrived at the Luo family mansion. This mansion was beautiful and very large, almost like a castle. At the same time, inside the mansion, there were a lot of hooded men prostrated before a woman who was sitting on her throne. A man approached her and informed her about what had happened to her daughter. Upon hearing this, she was shocked, as she didn't know how this could be possible. The Zio family not only stole and killed but were also going too far with this lie. Seeing that she was furious, the man asked her to calm her anger towards him, as he was a wretched person who had caused her suffering. Several minutes later, Luo Sando entered the room, approached her mother, sat beside her, rested her head on her knees, and started crying. Her mother placed her hand on her head and then began to look at her subordinates with a furious gaze. She decided definitively to do something against the Zio family. Her husband approached her, looked at her intently, extended his hands to the sides, and in a serious voice asked her to calm down, since the most important thing was that Luo Sando had returned safe and sound. He also added that the Zio family was a powerful family in the country, and they couldn't mess with them, being simple merchants. Jiang stayed silently observing and thought that her real name was Luo Sando. Her father turned his body towards Jiang, handed him a black card, closed his eyes, and with a smile thanked him for saving their daughter. He also asked him not to get rid of this black card. The mother turned her head towards him, closed her eyes, and with a pleasant smile told him that he was their benefactor. She had prepared a meal for him so that he could eat peacefully and then leave using their teleportation, which was very fast. Jiang took the black card, closed his eyes, and with a smile told them that he wasn't going to eat. But at that moment, his stomach started growling. He turned red, put his hand behind his head, and with a smile decided to eat a little. Upon seeing this, her father pointed out the place where the food was and decided to organize it immediately. While on the other side, her mother put her hand near her face, closed her eyes, and began to smile. The best chefs in the Luo family prepared the food in several minutes. Jiang ate several dishes until he stacked them one on top of another to form a column. One of the waiters who was bringing another dish approached him and, upon seeing this, became somewhat confused and surprised. At the same time, while Jiang had one hand resting on the table and with the other was holding a piece of meat thigh, he thought that as the number of insects increased, his appetite also became greater. Beside him, Luo Sando was sitting. She turned her head towards him and with a smile asked him not to rush and eat slowly. Next to her were seated her mother and father, who simply closed their eyes and with a joyful smile silently watched Jiang. Jiang started eating even more. She began to look at him and couldn't help but blush and be somewhat surprised. Her mother, who was enjoying a cup of tea, explained to her father that their daughter said Jiang belonged to the creation class and had divine rank. For her, he was very strange because she didn't know how he had been able to save their daughter from the hands of the Zio family. Her father put his hand under his chin, started looking at Jiang, and explained to her that although their daughter didn't want to say it, he was sure that Jiang had hidden abilities and wasn't as useless as he seemed. He also added that he was handsome. Both began to look into each other's eyes and with a smile thought that if he could help them fight against the Zio family and protect their daughter for her entire life, then he could be the perfect person. Her mother approached Jiang and with a pleasant smile asked him if he had a girlfriend. She also added that in their family, Sando also didn't have a boyfriend. Her hidden profession was also quite good. Besides being an expert in business, she could also be a financial manager. Her father stood behind him, gave him a thumbs up, and explained that Sando's body was also very sexy because she had measurements of 36-24-36. He also added that they made a perfect couple, and he had even thought of names for their future children. Jiang, who was drinking a glass of water, left it on the table, spit out the water, and was shocked upon hearing her parents' proposal. She began to blush like a tomato and wonder what was happening. Without thinking for a second, Jiang ran out and thanked them for their hospitality. He left with the excuse that he was full and still had something urgent to do. Seeing this, her father asked him to wait a little longer, as they wanted to talk to him. Sando approached her father, put her hand over his mouth, and asked him to be quiet. Her mother turned her head towards her and started looking at her with a disappointed look. She sat on the chair. Her father approached her and said that their son-in-law had left. He also added that as his wife, she should go say goodbye to him. Her mother approached them and asked her not to worry since her father had the location of the black card. Wherever he went, they would follow him. Upon hearing this, she grabbed her knees with both hands, closed her eyes, and with a scream asked them to be quiet. She began to look down and started imagining Jang. She thought that although he was handsome and strong, he was also terrifying. And even though he was truly terrifying, there was no doubt that he was handsome and strong at the same time. In the Zhao family, Zhao Yenin, the head of the family, learned that his grandson, Qin Wu, had died. Upon hearing this news, he couldn't help but become furious. With an angry look on his face, he ordered his subordinates to thoroughly investigate the murder. He didn't know who had done it and believed that Zhao Jino was responsible, so he ordered his other grandson to immediately send someone to investigate him. While a man was prostrated before him, another man named Zan, who had one hand in his pants pocket, began to approach his grandfather. He extended his other hand to the side and explained that Yuan Wu was already over 20 years old and had only reached level 30 of the second transformation, so he was useless. After saying this, he asked him what was lamentable about the death of a useless person and told his grandfather that it wasn't worth getting so angry about it. Zhao Yenin, who was sitting in his chair with both hands resting on his knees, started looking at Zan and told him that Yuan Wu was truly mediocre, nothing compared to him. Therefore, it wasn't a pity that he was dead. He also added that in the end, he was the grandson of him. Even to hit a dog, you had to look at who its owner was. He would like to know who in the country had enough courage to kill someone from the Zhao family. Upon hearing this, Zan began to smile, extended his hand forward, and his hand started emitting an evil energy. He asked his grandfather not to worry about this trivial matter since, after finishing the Tanya camp issue, it didn't matter who was guilty, he would take care of it in place of him. At the same time, Jang went to the night watch office. He opened the door and entered where Jang and several other people were. He turned his body to one side and was somewhat surprised to see that Jang had arrived. He began walking towards them, putting his hand behind his head, introducing himself as Jang Chen, the new member of the night watch. He couldn't help but wonder why there were so many people here. Jang approached him, placed his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, extended the other hand to the side, and with a smile told him that they had been waiting for him. Upon hearing this, Jang was somewhat surprised. Jang decided to introduce him to the new key members of their group. The first one was Yuio, a level 45 healer who was in the second stage. She used to be the youngest, but now he had taken away that position from her. Upon hearing this, she put her hand near her mouth, started looking at Jang, and couldn't help but blush and think that he was very handsome. This was the first time she had worked with someone so good-looking. The second member was Duan Fong, a level 49 archer who was also in the second stage. He didn't talk much but was quite conceited. He put his hand on his hip, placed the other one near his forehead, and with a smile told him that he was delighted to meet him. The third member was Chu Buong, a level 49 warrior. Although his body was small, he was strong and a great talker. He approached Jang, stood in front of him, closed his eyes, and with a smile explained to him that having a professional member of divine level was an achievement enough to boast about for a lifetime. The fourth member was a woman named Jane Tang, a master who was in the third stage. She was level 61 and belonged to the fire class. She was also a sub-commander. She approached them, placed her hands on Chu Buong and Jang's heads, began to caress them, and with a pleasant smile asked them to call her Aunt Tang in the future. She assured them that they would have meat to eat every day. With a pleasant smile, Jang introduced himself as a humble awakened from the creation class. He asked how he could deserve so much enthusiasm from them. Deep down, he knew that even if it was clear, even if it was of divine level, the spiritual master's creation class was not well regarded by people. Jang put one hand in his pocket, extended the other to the side, and told him that there was nothing wrong with being of the divine level spiritual master creation class. He asked him not to pay attention to idiots who had no good eye and only said nonsense. They all trusted him. Jane Tang put her hands on her hips, turned her head towards him, and with a smile told him that he was special because he had chosen to be one of them, the night watch. From now on, this would be his home. Jang approached him, put his arm on his shoulder, and decided to talk about the main issue. He extended his hand to one side and with a serious look explained that if he wanted to enroll in the Tanya training camp, he had to have a level higher than 20. He didn't know if Jang was. With a calm look, Jang revealed to him that now he was level 17. Upon hearing this, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised to see that he had changed jobs just 3 days ago and was already level 17. He grabbed Jang by the shoulders, closed his eyes, started laughing out loud, and thought that he had not made a mistake in choosing him. He believed that Jang truly had divine talent, and it wouldn't be difficult for him to advance 3 levels in 3 days. He decided to enroll him in the Tanya Genius Camp right away. Jang opened his eyes, turned his head to the side, and saw everyone else staring at him with a serious expression. He put his hand in his pocket, turned his body towards Jang, and with a serious look asked him if he had gotten into trouble with someone very dangerous in the last 3 days, as there was an unknown third-grade master investigating his whereabouts using their class. He turned his head to the side, started looking at the ground, and upon hearing that a third-grade master was investigating him, he couldn't help but wonder if it could be a member of the Zio family.
This is the
Jang
end
crossed
of the...
his arms and told Wok that he was leaving the rest in her hands. Upon hearing this, she responded with a simple understood. Then she raised her hands towards the sky, causing a green energy to emanate and form a barrier. She turned her head to the side and explained to everyone that she had placed a protective barrier against espionage around the headquarters so that they could all speak freely without worrying about being spied on. Jang simply stood still, began to look at her, and couldn't help but wonder what kind of power this was. In a matter of seconds, her power started expanding in all directions, causing the protective barrier to become increasingly larger. Jang approached Jang, placed his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile asked him if there was something he was hiding, adding that they were all here to help him. The others listened attentively in silence. John lowered his head, began to touch his head with his hand, and with a sad look revealed to everyone that yesterday he had killed Zi Yuanwu from the Z family. Although he had completely eliminated the traces in the body, he wasn't sure if the Z family had other methods of investigation and tracking. Upon hearing this, everyone was shocked. Jane Tang began to look at John with a terrified expression and asked him if he had really eliminated a member of the Z family. Jai Gang reached out his hand towards him, started looking at him with a surprised expression, and asked him if he had killed Zhao Yin's grandson, the cultivator who was in the 8th stage of Gen Yishuing. The cultivator couldn't help but be shocked and started wondering how strong Jang was to have killed a member of the Z family. Jan, who was touching his head with his hand, upon seeing their expressions, thought that he had now caused problems for everyone. Jai Gang began to look at Zhang and explain to everyone that it was well known that the Zio family had committed many evil acts. The young members of the Zio family had caused many problems in recent years. He couldn't help but praise him for doing good by protecting people. He crossed his arms and with a serious look remembered that the power of the 8th transformation was undoubtedly terrifying, but according to what he knew, his last grandson was Zhao Yuanwu, the most incompetent and least favorite of him. That being said, it was possible that old Zi Yenin would not personally intervene. Jane Tang, who had one hand on her waist, extended the other towards him and started looking at him with a determined gaze. She asked him not to worry because if the Z family sent someone, they, the Night Watch, would protect him since they were not weak. Zhang began to look at Jian with a pleasant gaze and couldn't help but smile and feel happy. He was an orphan, and even though he had had neighbors who had helped him since he was little, this was the first time he felt like having a home. Ji Gang turned his back on him, started to walk away, slightly turned his head towards him, and thought that even if Zhao Yuanwu was useless, he probably had already reached the 2nd level of cultivation. He quickly approached Zhang, grabbed him by the shoulders, started looking into his eyes, and with a surprised look asked him how he had managed to kill someone of level 30 in the combat class, being an awakened person of level 17 in the creation class. Dong became somewhat nervous, started sweating, extended his hand towards him, and asked him not to get too excited because, actually, at that moment, someone had helped him. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang asked him who had helped him. Zhang put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile revealed that the 3rd daughter of the Liu family who lived in Zhanggan had been the person who had helped him. He also added that she had awakened a hidden defense class. Upon hearing this, everyone started looking at Zhang with a surprised look and couldn't help but wonder if he was talking about Liu Sando, the daughter of the wealthiest merchant family in Zhanggan, the Liu family. Zhang approached Zhang, grabbed him by the shoulders again, started shaking him, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile praised him because even though the Liu family was not a family of warriors, it couldn't be denied that they were rich. So if someday Zhang found himself in trouble, then the Liu family wouldn't just stand idly by. He began to look at Zhai Gang and couldn't help but sweat and wonder what he was doing at that moment. Zhang's body began to emit a powerful purple energy. Several seconds later, once Zhang opened his eyes, he saw that Zhang's body was surrounded by a powerful energy. Quickly, he removed his hands from his shoulder, and upon seeing this, he couldn't help but be shocked as sweat was dripping from his face. He began to look at him with a surprised expression and remembered that Leo Sando had awakened the defense class, so she didn't have much attacking power, which meant that the person who had killed Yuan Wu had been Zhang. Zhang extended his hand forward, and the poison mist of Little Nine appeared in his palm. He began to stare at it, revealing to everyone that he was actually an awakened person specialized in 2 classes. He revealed to everyone that his other hidden class was poison. D, in fact, who was standing behind him, started looking at him with a surprised expression and couldn't help but be shocked and wonder what this power was. Zhai Gang tried to shake Zhang's hand, asking him how many more secrets he had that he didn't know, but Zhang moved his hand aside because in the palm of his hand was the poisonous mist of Little Nine and explained that this was very poisonous, fearing that he wouldn't be able to resist it. The others stayed silent, observing this without interrupting. Just before Zhang could finish his sentence, Zhai Gang approached him, shook his hand, then closed his eyes and with a smile reassured him not to worry because he knew how to defend himself well against poisons. Little M's poisonous mist gradually began to make contact with Zhai Gang's hand. Jane Tang started to stare at their hands, and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but wonder what this strange poison was. Several seconds later, once Zhai Gang stopped shaking his hand and pulled it back, he saw that his hand had already been poisoned. Upon seeing this, he realized that this was not good. Zhang put his hand on his shoulder, closed his eyes, and told him that this time he had gone too far. Gradually, the poisonous mist began to spread over his hand. He grabbed his wrist with the other hand, stared at Zhang aggressively, and asked him to stop talking nonsense since he hadn't even tried to defend himself against the poison from the beginning. Upon hearing this, Jane Kong, who was standing behind him, closed her eyes and started laughing. Meanwhile, on the other side, CHW Buing sat near Zhai Gang's hand and began staring at it intently while wondering what this poison was. Quickly, Zhai Gang turned his head back to where Zioki was and asked her to come quickly and help him get rid of the poison. Z, who had one hand extended to the side, deactivated the barrier, causing the energy to slowly disappear. She put her other hand near her mouth, closed her eyes, and while laughing, responded to him with a yes. Zhang reminded him again that he had told him that this poison was very strong. He sat on the couch, and while he had one hand resting on his knee, he extended the other where he had the poison to the side. Z approached him, closed her eyes, and with a smile, she placed both hands near his hand and using her power began to heal him. While she was healing him, he turned his head towards Zhang, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile told him that this poison was very good, adding that the more skills he had, the happier he would be. Chuing approached them, placed both hands on the arm of the sofa, started staring at Zhang, and silently observed him. Several seconds later, once Z had completely healed his hand, with a serious look, he began to look at Zhang and despite him being very talented, he advised him to forget about enrolling in the Tenu camp since it was not good to enroll after what had happened with the Zio family. Although the Tenu camp offered many valuable resources, it was most likely that the prodigy of the Z family would also participate, so they should not risk it for just a few resources. Jane Tang, who was standing behind him, put a hand on her waist, closed her eyes, and began nodding to indicate to him that Zhai Gang was right. Zhang started looking at Zhai Gang with a confused look and asked what he meant by resources. While he had his eyes closed, he explained to him that resources referred to the blood of fierce beasts, equipment, and other things. If one could be among the first, then they would also receive rewards such as mysterious fruits and secret realm scrolls. Upon hearing this, Zhang couldn't help but be shocked and wonder if what Ji Gang was saying was true. He began to imagine the insects and thought that those resources were much better than going out to hunt fierce beasts oneself. No one knew, perhaps the insects could reproduce again. At that moment, while his body was surrounded by the poisonous mist, he began to stare at Ji Gang with a serious look and asked him to let him enroll in the camp as he was not afraid of danger. He had confidence and knew that he would be able to protect himself. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang asked him to wait as he needed to think about it. At the same time, somewhere on the West Lake belonging to the Z family, there was a temple in the middle of the lake. Someone entered the water and using their power moved it aside, creating a large crack in the ground. This person started approaching the temple. This person was Ziogonga's son, named Zab Bihan. Upon seeing how powerful he was, the others realized that he was the strongest genius in the Z family, and his combat power had reached a new level. As drops of the water from the lake fell like rain, Bean, who held a sword with one hand, turned his head back and with a serious look asked his subordinates to stop talking nonsense and also asked if they had found what they were looking for. 3 men wearing hoods placed their hands on their abdomen, bowed their heads before him, closed their eyes, and one of them revealed to him that he had found out that the young master Yuan Wu had been pursuing a woman named Liu Sando. He also added that she had been traveling with someone named Zhang Chen. Ban slightly turned his head back and with a serious look remembered that the girl from the Liu family was not from the combat class. He asked his subordinate who this guy called Zhang Chen was. The man revealed that Zhang Chen had awakened a creation class of divine rank. The last thing they knew was that he had gone to the Night Watch headquarters. One of the men placed a hand on his chest, bowed his head before him, closed his eyes, and revealed that they had discovered that he and Liu Sando had enrolled in the camp. He also added that, however, these 2 people were only suspects, and there was still no concrete evidence. Upon hearing this, Bean couldn't help but smile. With a penetrating gaze, he began to look to the side and thought that they were indeed suspects in this crime. A person who had awakened a creation class of divine rank was very interesting to him. Knowing that they had enrolled in the camp, he couldn't help but feel relieved as now he wouldn't have any need to make a special trip and search for them. After 3 days, he simply decided to kill them at the camp. At the same time, at the Night Watch headquarters, Ji Gang and John went to his office and sat on the sofa. Zhang, who had one arm resting on his knee, extended his other hand to the side, began staring intently at Zhang, and explained that even though he had already enrolled him in the Tenu camp, he was still very worried. He had already found a powerful ally among the people registered for him. This person was the little princess, Muhan, from the Mu family, who had cultivation at the 7th level of transformation and was known as the Sealing Queen. Before going to camp, Zhang had to accompany her to explore a secret realm in which he would not only be able to improve his level but also establish relationships with his companions in advance. D, who was sitting in front of him with his elbows resting on the arms of the sofa, simply remained silently listening. Jai Gang approached him, took his hand, started looking at him, and with a smile explained to him that he had heard that Muhan was not only extremely beautiful but also the same age as him. She would be arriving soon, so he asked Zhang to use his charms to win her over. Upon hearing this, Zhang couldn't help but start sweating and become somewhat confused. He forced a smile at Ji Gang and replied that he was going to give it a try. At the same time, someone began knocking on the office door, and Ji Gang gave them permission to enter. Muhan and a man opened the door and began to enter inside. She rested her elbow on one hand, supported her head on the other hand, and started looking at Zhang. She told them that Gang had asked her to accompany someone to a secret realm. The man put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and started smiling. She asked Jai Gang if he had changed his mind. Jai Gang told her that it was an honor for them to meet her in person. Muhan crossed her arms and began to look at the ground, feeling somewhat confused. The man started touching his head and smiling. Seeing this, Zhang couldn't help but wonder what was happening. Both stood up. Jai Gang rested his arm on Zhang's shoulder, put the other one on his waist, started looking at her, and explained that he hadn't answered them yesterday because he was angry with her grandfather, but today he was willing to accept this, but with a special condition. That condition was that she had to take Zhang Chen with her. Upon hearing this, Zhang's expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and start wondering what was happening. Muhan placed her hand on her hip and as she walked towards them, she told him that she had already given him the level 30 secret realm scroll. After saying this, she asked if he still wanted to impose more conditions. Gang, who had his hand resting on Zhang's shoulder, told her that everyone had their own conditions. Upon hearing this, she thought that he was looking for someone reliable to level up with since Zhang couldn't enter a secret realm lower than level 50. She came to the conclusion that they were looking for her for this reason. The man put his arms behind his back and with a smile began to walk towards them in silence. She approached Zhang, started looking into his eyes, and asked him what level he was in and what class he had awakened. He began to look at her and with a calm voice explained that he was level 17 and had awakened the creation class. Upon hearing this, she placed a hand on her waist, started pointing at Zhang with the other hand, looked at him disdainfully, and upon seeing that he was a level 17 novice of the creation class, she called him trash. Zhang couldn't help but get angry and think that she was a spoiled brat. Ji Gang exploded with rage, clenched his fist tightly, and with a hateful look prepared to teach her a good lesson. He called her an empty-headed brat and asked her to show more respect since Zhang had awakened a hidden divine rank. Seeing this, the other man grabbed him by the hip, closed his eyes, and with a forced smile asked him to calm down, explaining that Muhan's boyfriend had just left her, and that's why she was behaving this way. She turned her head back and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but start to feel scared. She thought that this time she had gone too far. Zhang turned his head towards Ji Gang and upon seeing his attitude, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised and confused at the same time. She became nervous, turned her body towards him, closed her eyes, extended her hands towards him, apologized to him, and asked him to calm down. Zhang started touching his head with his hand and thought that this situation was strange. The secret realm they were going to was called the Village of Light. It was level 30, and the entry requirements were that only a maximum of 5 people below level 50 could enter. The conditions to complete this secret realm were to eliminate all the monsters, kill the boss, or destroy the sacrifice altar. Several hours later, they arrived at the portal. Duan FK, who had one hand on his waist, turned his head towards them and with a serious look asked everyone to listen carefully. This time, he was going to be the leader. He asked everyone to remember that if they accidentally separated or found themselves in danger, then they should immediately return to this teleportation point. Although the probability of this secret realm becoming unstable was low, caution had to be taken in case of any eventuality. Everyone had to return here immediately and leave the secret realm. Muhan, who had her arms crossed, began looking at him with a smile as she silently listened. CHW Buing approached Zhang, reached out his hand towards the portal, closed his eyes, and with a smile told him that a level 30 secret realm scroll cost at least 1 billion. Z, who was holding onto her elbow with her other hand, also stayed silent, listening. Muhan, who had her arms crossed, turned her head back and started looking at Zhang. She called him a newbie and asked him not to start crying like a baby after entering the secret realm because it would only hold them back. Zhang simply started staring at her and remained silent. Everyone entered the portal. Shu Buing turned his head back and with a smile asked him not to worry as he would take care of protecting him. Zhang began walking towards the portal, and despite this secret realm being only level 30, he had a strange feeling. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.